Expedition 33 isn't just one of the most emotionally powerful stories in modern gaming. It's a tapestry of journeys, sacrifices, and mysteries that stretch far beyond the final credits. As we traveled alongside the members of Expedition 33, we became invested in their struggles, their triumphs, and the history of the canvas world itself. Along the way, the game allowed us to uncover journals left behind by earlier expeditions, brief glimpses into what became of those who went before, and why so many never returned. But for those who stopped at the journals, it was only the beginning. The real stories of the lost expeditions are hidden in the ruins and landmarks they left behind, etched into the environment, waiting to be pieced together. What happened to the 51 expeditions who came before? How did they fail? And what secrets did they leave buried in the canvas? My name is Vigil, and this is Video Game Lore. Today, we begin part 1 of our 2-part journey to uncover the true fate of those who came before Expedition 33. We'll use every journal, every clue from the world itself, and, where the lore is silent, thoughtful speculation to fill in the gaps and honor the memories of those who paved the way for those who would come after. Join me as we retrace their trails and shed light on the paths that led to triumph, tragedy, or oblivion. This is the story of what really happened to the other expeditions in Expedition 33. Let's begin. After the fracture, a large part of Lumiere and its inhabitants were cast far out to sea, separated from the former continent. Once the city regrouped and recovered from the shock, and from the arrival of the Nevrons, who now attacked them in force, Painted Verso and his father, Painted Grimoire, led efforts to rebuild Lumiere. Together, they constructed a powerful chroma-fueled shield dome to protect the city from further Nevron attacks. Painted Grimoire, having been separated from his wife Eileen, was desperate to find out if she and others had survived. With the approval of the newly formed council and many civilian volunteers, the people of Lumiere built ships, gathered supplies, and a large group of them under the command of Painted Grimoire set out from the city on a search and rescue mission. They called themselves Expedition Zero. Once they set sail, the expedition headed toward the only passage through the land barrier that separated them from the continent, a large, mist-shrouded cave whose exit was marked by a sizable waterfall. Evidence of failed crossings can be seen at the base of the waterfall and on the rocks below. Examining the map of the newly shattered canvas world and the locations of the Expedition Zero flags, we can infer the plan of action and how they navigated this drastically changed and uncharted world. They crossed the seas, uncertain of what awaited them. One of Painted Verso's closest friends, Simon, joined him on the expedition. Simon was also in a relationship with Painted Verso's sister, Painted Clea, a detail that would become relevant later in the journey. Eventually, they spotted land at the distance, and landed at what is now known as the Dark Shores. Painted Verso, thanks to his extensive chroma abilities inherited from his family and the Paintress, was Painted Grimoire's best scout. These abilities gave Painted Verso and his family greater endurance and the power to leap higher than others, amongst other things they would discover later. Setting out on foot, Painted Verso and his team explored the terrain, crossing through the spring meadows, flying waters, redwoods, and eventually passing through areas that would later be known as the Ancient Sanctuary and the Gestural Village. A large floating island resembling a wooden coliseum caught their attention, and they moved their way toward it. While it is unknown exactly how they reached the floating stadium, it is likely that Painted Verso's team made their way to the shores near the crushing caverns and signaled for Painted Grimoire's ships. These early ships were likely equipped with large grapple hooks, which would have been within Lumiere's technologies and capabilities. Sailing around to the shores near Yellow Harvest, they used the hooks to connect to the rocks of the floating island. Painted Verso and his crew then ascended to the top. Upon arrival, they planted their flag and proceeded toward the dark construction site. There, they found several gestural survivors building the arena, and asked if they could search for any human survivors. After searching the area, they found none. Disappointed, they descended and returned to the ships to report the news to Painted Grimoire before setting off once more into the unknown. To increase their chances of finding human survivors, Painted Grimoire likely decided to split the expedition into groups. Painted Verso agreed and divided his scouting teams in two. Painted Verso likely took command of one of the ships, possibly sailing the eastern route along the shores of the Fallen Leaves. Painted Grimoire, meanwhile, led the rest of the group toward another floating island, distinguished by strange neon lights and flying creatures. Painted Grimoire and his crew arrived, grappled to the land above, and sent the scout team climbing to the top. As they reached the summit, they planted their flag and began their exploration. The landscape reminded them of the flying waters they had crossed earlier. Along the narrow pathways, they encountered glowing animals, and in the distance, a large casino. Hoping to find survivors, they made their way toward it. On the way, they met a gestural who claimed to have been stranded there since the fracture, and had made the place his home. After a brief conversation, they bid him farewell and set up grapples to eventually reach the casino. Once there, another gestural answered their call and assured them he was the only one inside. Disappointed, the team left and returned to their ship to continue their journey. Realizing that the mainland was likely swarming with Nephrons, the expedition likely chose to avoid the interior and instead sailed along the coastlines whenever possible. As Painted Verso's crew navigated the western shores, they spotted 2 more floating islands with structures on them and decided to investigate. Painted Verso first led his team to a floating island with amber-covered leaves and a church at its center. They grappled the ship's hooks to the island's base and climbed to the top. After planting the expedition flag, they searched the surrounding area and the dilapidated church, but found no signs of survivors. They then sailed across the strait and climbed the mountains just before another floating island, this one home to a large old manor. After grappling to its base and ascending, the team explored the manor thoroughly, searching both lower and upper levels, laying grapples and chroma ropes, but again found no signs of life. At one point, they reached a large door across a chasm, but could not open it, nor did anyone answer from the other side. Finding no humans in need of rescue, the team left the manor, with Painted Verso feeling an odd sense of familiarity as they departed. They descended back down to the mountain, rejoined their ships, and continued their voyage. Meanwhile, Painted Grimoire and his crew sailed along the eastern coastlines. Navigating around the nearby rock quarry, they encountered large corals blocking their path. Using the ship's sturdy, metallic hull, they rammed through the coral and continued on their journey. They eventually reached a narrow strait that passed by several shores. Painted Grimoire may have sent scouts to investigate these areas, but like Painted Verso's crew, they likely avoided venturing too far inland to minimize casualties and Nevron encounters. Exiting the strait, they saw a large, shattered floating island ahead, marking the entrance to another vast sea. They anchored the ship and grappled up to the remains of the floating island structure. Upon reaching the top, the team planted their flag and explored the large open room, which was decorated with glowing canvases and a central globe of a strange world, surrounded by stoic statues. At the far end, they found a locked door. After spending some time trying to gain entry and finding no signs of survivors, they returned to the ship and reported their findings to Painted Grimoire. They then set out into the open sea and soon found Painted Verso and his crew waiting nearby. The two groups shared information about the regions they had explored and agreed that if they were to learn anything about Aline's fate, they needed to head toward the monolith that had appeared after the fracture, now marked with the number 100. Together, they crossed the sea, navigating through additional coral fields and passing unfamiliar islands with strange structures. Choosing not to investigate these further, they continued straight for the monolith. When they arrived, they found a massive chroma barrier blocking their way. Deciding to rest and plan their next steps, they made camp on a small island just outside the barrier. Later, Painted Grimoire and Painted Verso were approached by a woman who looked identical to Painted Clair. She revealed that there was much more about their world they didn't know, claiming it was all a lie, and promised to tell them the truth if they followed her. She likely led them to a nearby island pulsing with intense chroma and guided them inside. Painted Verso planted another flag at the entrance, and he and his father followed the woman down a twisting, chroma-filled path. At the end, she brought them before a large canvas featuring a portrait of the Desandra family. She explained that Aline was not Painted Verso's true mother, nor Painted Grimoire's real wife. Revealing herself as Clair Desandra, she explained that their family were facsimiles created by Aline as part of her grieving process for the real Verso, and that each day Aline spent in the canvas was slowly killing her. Clay insisted that Aline and the real Renoir needed to leave the canvas world to address matters in the real world. Both Painted Verso and Painted Grimoire were stunned, refusing to accept her explanation. Returning to the Expedition Zero campsite, they were confronted by Clay, who demanded they return to Lumiere and help her remove Aline and the human creations from the canvas. When they refused, Clair attacked, unleashing massive chroma attacks and summoning Nevrons in an effort to trap their chroma as well. It was in this battle that Painted Verso and Painted Grimoire discovered their own immortality, awakening to find the rest of the expedition completely slaughtered. Realizing the danger, they fled and hurried back to Lumiere to report what had happened. Unknown to Painted Grimoire and Painted Verso, Simon had survived. Clair watched as he slowly rose, now missing an arm, battered but alive. She approached and confronted him. Simon, disoriented, called her name, believing she was Painted Clair. He likely asked how she had found her way there, but Clair silenced him, explaining the true danger that awaited and the role he alone could play in ending his people's suffering. Imbuing Simon with vast amounts of chroma, Clair granted him new abilities tailored to confront the colossal creatures known as the Axons. She sent him on a mission to hunt down the one that roamed the ruined streets of Old Lumiere, the Hauler. She promised that if he brought her its heart, she could forge a weapon powerful enough to break the barrier and give him a fighting chance against the Paintress at the top of the monolith. Determined, Simon made his way to the ruins of Old Lumiere and confronted the Hauler. The battle was brutal, both combatants trading devastating blows. Simon summoning spectral swords dripping with chroma, the Hauler responding with raw monstrous force. In the end, Simon prevailed, pinning the Hauler to the earth with a final massive sword driven through its skull. He claimed the Axon's heart and returned to Clair, who fashioned it into a great sword and sent him on his way to face the Paintress. Simon, unaware of Clair's betrayal of his beloved, carried on. Clair had captured Painted Clair, holding her prisoner in the Flying Manor. She had painted over her, transforming her into a machine, mindlessly painting Nevrons into existence. Crossing the sea, Simon shattered the chroma barrier protecting the Paintress. Planting his flag, he surveyed the vast structure before him. He followed the winding path of lit candles, his mind racing with strategy and doubt, uncertain if his newfound strength was enough. He reached the base of the monolith, entered, and was startled by what he saw, a distorted, mirror-like version of Lumiere. Planting another flag to mark his progress, he wandered the fractured streets, dispatching Nevrons with ease and leaping across the broken cityscape. Simon pressed on, planting flags at each key point, at the entrance to a large cave among floating canvases, and at the exit shrouded in fog. Emerging, he heard a woman's voice and followed it to the summit of the monolith, where he finally encountered Eileen. Recognizing Clair's treachery, she decided to turn Clair's plan against her. Eileen revealed to Simon that Clair herself was the true Paintress, and that she was torturing Painted Clair, the woman Simon loved. She told him the truth of their world, warning that the real threat was Renoir, dwelling beneath the monolith and responsible for what she called the gommage that would eventually erase them all from the canvas. If Simon could defeat him, he might save Painted Clair and the very existence of all Lumerians. Simon agreed and descended beneath the monolith. He was awed by the bright yellow chroma that suffused the cavern below. Planning another flag to mark his journey, he navigated the distorted labyrinth, battling Renoir's creations as he pressed deeper. Reaching a small cave, he planted another flag, feeling the intense chroma radiating from within. Gathering his courage, he entered, only to fall into a vast abyss. There, Simon faced Renoir in battle. Despite his strength and determination, he could not overcome Renoir's power. Defeated and trapped, surrounded by the remnants of their clash, his chroma-filled swords embedded in the earth, Simon accepted his fate. He set down one final flag and sat to record a last journal entry, leaving his story for those who would come after.
Simon. More and more of my mind is fading away. I must put my words down on paper before I lose myself entirely. My beautiful Clair. What did she do to you? That Paintress. She fooled me. She looked so much like you, and I believed her story. She granted me the power to fell the Axons and enter the monolith. I realized too late that she had warped my mind. That she had in fact taken you away, locked you somewhere I could never reach, and set me on a path to destroy your future. But then I met Aline, who showed me that I could save you. With her help, I descended to the bottom of the monolith, where Aline had sealed him away. The one who brings the gamache. The one who threatens our very existence. But his powers are strong, and I'm finding it harder and harder to fight his influence over my mind. My mind is breaking. My final thoughts are only a few. I despair. But one day, our suffering will end, and we will find our way back to each other. In this life, or another.
Meanwhile, Painted Verso and Painted Grimoire returned to Lumiere and reported to the council and anyone willing to listen that the paintress was not as she seemed. She was not responsible for their current predicament. Their warnings were met with skepticism and disbelief. The council then called upon Julie, Claude, Louis, and Dion, instructing them to set out and uncover the truth about Expedition Zero and its mission's outcome. Using his wit and charm, Painted Verso convinced Julie to allow Painted Grimoire and Painted Alicia to join the group, arguing they would make excellent guides and could assist in searching for the missing Painted Clair. Julie and the council, recognizing the value of their knowledge and experience, reluctantly agreed. Together, they crossed the continent, exploring and building rapport. Over time, Painted Verso began to fall in love with Julie. While the story doesn't clarify whether she reciprocated, it is reasonable to believe she developed some feelings for him as well. They reached the eastern shores of the continent, near the far side of the rock quarry, and made their way across the landscape battling many Nevrons. Eventually, they found a set of ruined buildings on a cliffside near the quarry, and decided to camp nearby before investigating the ruins. In the distance, several Nevrons, including a particularly large and dangerous one, wandered near the entrance. Painted Verso, Julie, and her team approached the abandoned buildings and confronted the Nevrons in a dangerous battle. Painted Verso sustained many injuries and was eventually struck clean in half by the large Nevron. He managed to piece himself back together, but Julie and the others witnessed the event. Painted Verso tried to dismiss it, but to no avail. The group returned to camp, and Painted Verso went to speak to his father, seeking advice about what had happened. Meanwhile, Julie and the others waited for his return. When he came back, they ambushed him, bound him, and began to torture him for answers about his family and his true nature. Despite his attempts to explain, his responses did not satisfy them. Julie left Claude, Louis, and Dion to continue the interrogation while she stepped away to gather her thoughts, recording her reflections in her journal.
Julie, search and rescue. I know what I saw. He died. Fucking died. That attack destroyed half his torso. There's no walking away from that. But when I found him, he was unconscious but whole. His uniform was destroyed, yes, but his chest was merely bruised. He says the blast just missed him and it was chaotic during battle, so I probably misunderstood what I saw. Bullshit! Absolute bloody bullshit! He and his father keep saying the paintress is the solution, not the problem. But I don't buy it anymore. I think they're lying about what happened to Expedition Zero. Somehow, everyone else died, but they walked out without a scratch. It hurts to think he'd betray us. But nobody ever expects to be betrayed. His mistake, though. He's thinking his charm is sufficient to sell his lies. We'll take him tomorrow night. Claude, Louise, and Dion are no fools. They saw what I saw. We will get answers. And if he is a traitor, then he will share the fate of traitors.
During her absence, Painted Verso broke free from his restraints and killed Claude, Louis, and Dion, leaving the encampment in flames. Julie, seeing the blaze, returned and screamed as she saw Painted Verso bloodied and angry. She drew her weapon and attacked. Painted Verso steeled himself, and with a swift blow, stabbed her through the stomach, killing her, and then gently laying her down. Painted Alicia came to her brother's side, comforting him as they looked out beyond the flames to the distant monolith. That night, Painted Verso and his family camped together, choosing not to return to Lumiere. Instead, they resolved to help the paintress in her fight against the real Grimoire. Painted Verso wrote a journal entry and left it behind at the site.
I miss you. I don't have the right to miss you, but I do. I wish I could talk to you. Tell you. Fuck. I don't know what I would tell you. Just ask that you forgive me. Julie. Forgive me. I'm not a traitor. I'm not. I'm trying to save us all. But you're right. I am a coward. I'm a fucking coward. You deserved to know why, but I couldn't. I couldn't face you properly. Not, and still do, what had to be done. Papa believes you're Clair's creation, and even if you're not, we can no longer trust you. But I think you just wanted answers. Why couldn't you just let it go? Why did you convince them to abduct me, interrogate me? No. Fuck, I shouldn't say that. You thought I was a traitor. You were doing what you thought was right, just like we are. I swear to you, I'm doing what's right. I should have known when you started questioning things that you wouldn't be fooled. But how could I even explain? You'd have thought I'd gone mad. Doppelgangers. Canvas worlds. Man. But Papa's right. We can't take the risk. Too much is at stake. It had to be done. It had to. Clair already took our sister. If we want to save our family, our world, our people, we can't take any chances. And once we free Mama, she'll bring you back. It won't be forever. I promise. I promise. We deserve to live. All of us. We deserve to exist.
The painted Desandra family departed to live apart from Lumiere, bringing Expedition Zero's journey to an end. Since Julie and her team did not return from their journey, the Council decided not to send any more expeditions that we know of. Nearly 15 years would pass after the failure of Expedition Zero, and in Monolith Year 84, the people of Lumiere began to notice that something was wrong. We can speculate that watching the Paintress change the number on the monolith had become a kind of pastime, with many citizens no doubt gathering at the harbor each year to witness the event. During one such gathering, as the Paintress changed the number to 84, those who were 84 years old or older vanished in a swirling of red petals. This event sent the citizens of Lumiere into a panic, and the Council concluded that it had to be the Paintress who had just caused this atrocity. In response, they quickly commissioned a new expedition, naming it after the number on the monolith, Expedition 84. Yasmin was appointed expedition commander, and she led the ship out toward the land barrier, hoping to retrace Expedition Zero's steps and attempt to find a way to stop the Gamage. After clearing the waterfall, they adjusted their course and headed straight to the dark shores. Upon landing, they set out on foot, trying to find any trace of Expedition Zero's trail. They likely traversed through the rough terrain of the shores and made their way through mountains covered in trees, taking notes, making camp, and getting rest whenever possible. After traveling for several days, they reached a clearing in the forest that would later be known as the Fountain. They moved towards several collapsed buildings and a giant fallen creature near the entrance. Gathering themselves, the expeditioners entered a small meadow filled with beautiful flowers none of them had seen in ages. They brought in their supplies and made camp, also planting an Expedition 84 flag near the entrance. As they continued to explore, Yasmin took in the random street signs and rusting sculptures scattered around the area. Many roots had burst forth from the ground, weaving through the remnants of crumbling buildings and intertwining with various sculptures and distant statues. The group pressed on, making their way through a narrow path, as if the very stone before them had split open just for their passage. As they cleared the way, they were struck by the sheer size of the creature that now lay lifeless before them. Passing beneath its legs, they discovered a large stone fountain, which may have once been part of old Lumiere. Yasmin led her team through the wildflowers and broken cobblestone streets until they approached one of the large ruined buildings draped in red moss. This path led them to the edge of a beautiful creek, prompting Yasmin to record an entry in her journal, starting the tradition of leaving something for those who would come after.
Yasmin, Monolith Year 84. My favorite theory is that she's some crazy demonic maths teacher, and this is our punishment for failing at numbers. A load of superstitious hysteria, but at least we're here now. It's worth it just to walk these valleys. I've barely seen a meadow since Lady Genocide and her poison smoke took up residence. And the sky. I feel almost naked without the dome above us. We're so exposed, but it's thrilling too. We landed at the exact spot where Expedition Zero touched ground and retraced their route. But there's not a single scrap of cloth or body anywhere. Bloody hell, we're out here chasing shadows. 15-year-old shadows. I'm glad we restarted the expeditions. But how the hell are we supposed to find them? No trail could last 15 years.
Sometime after, Yasmin and her expedition were attacked by several Nevrons armed with spears. They fought valiantly and managed to take some down, but ultimately, they were overwhelmed. The Nevrons ruthlessly stabbed and killed the entire expedition, trapping their chroma and turning them to stone. Eventually, one of the Nevrons thrust its spear through Yasmin, killing her instantly and sealing the fate of Expedition 84. Their stories lost to time and remembered in Lumiere as a failure. There are no flags or journals anywhere to be found for Expeditions 83 and 82. Some interpret this as evidence that those expeditions were never launched, but I personally believe it is more likely that they were expeditions that failed so completely that they barely made it out of Lumiere's harbor, never even reaching the true start of their journey. When we examine the land barrier, we notice several ships lying wrecked on the right of the cave entrance, scattered along the shores. On the other side, at the bottom of the falls themselves, there are even more destroyed ships that clearly failed to make it safely through the passage. My speculation based on these observations is that both Expeditions 83 and 82 set sail from Lumiere only to meet disaster almost immediately, unable to progress beyond the very threshold of their quest, save for the ruined vessels they left behind. Another year passed, and with it, another Gamage arrived. Expedition 81 was commissioned, led by Renee and Gregoire as her second in command. She commanded a small fleet of ships, and together, they set sail toward the land barrier's cave entrance. Their likely goal was to reach what they believed to be the main continent, but a storm or some other disaster struck, sending them crashing into the eastern cliffs of the Dark Shores. After the crash, they checked on everyone, gathered what supplies they could salvage, and disembarked, making their way through the rough terrain. Eventually, they emerged on the other side, and in the distance, saw a giant glowing tree that would later be known as the Indigo Tree. Collecting everything they could carry, the group set out towards the spring meadows. Their path took them from a waterfall down a stone walkway littered with broken cobblestones. The path was lined with luminescent blue flowers, and they noticed some of the same structures and statues that Expedition 84 had discovered 3 years earlier near the fountain. Large roots wound through the landscape, and they passed under massive stone archways. Each expeditioner was struck by the sheer beauty of this world, a beauty denied to them during their isolation in Lumiere. Eventually, their way was blocked by a large building. They searched the area thoroughly, looking for any traces of past expeditions or clues about the status of this new world, but found nothing. Carrying their crates and supplies, they climbed up several ledges and set up camp in caves and other sheltered spots, spending days investigating every detail. Renee sent some of her people ahead to scout through the building. Inside, they found an upside-down world, furniture clinging to the ceilings, parts of the roof collapsed to form natural ramps. On the second floor, they pitched a tent and made camp, waiting to continue their journey through the building the next day. That night, tragedy struck. While the expeditioners slept, a group of Nevrons attacked, killing some of them in their sleep. The aftermath was shocking. Those killed were now petrified, their chroma trapped rather than released back into the world. This development put Gregoire on edge. leading him to advise against many of Renee's future suggestions and actions. The next day, they finished making their way through the building. On the other side, a breathtaking sight awaited them, a vast, sprawling pathway of stone cliffs covered in flowers, with roots of the indigo tree shining in the distance and holding the pathways together. They descended to a crossroads and planted an Expedition 81 flag to mark their progress. Choosing the path that led most directly to the indigo tree, they continued onward. Along their journey, they encountered many large Nevrons, some made entirely of stone. Despite the constant danger, the expeditioners managed to cross vast chasms and eventually reached the top of a nearby hill. There, they pitched their tents once more and spent the rest of the day exploring the area. But their vigilance faltered, and in a moment of rest, or perhaps simple ignorance, the expedition was attacked again by Nevrons. They tried to hold the attackers off, hoping for help to arrive, but were quickly overwhelmed. The Nevron struck one expeditioner through the chest and another through the leg, the two collapsing near each other. The last three were impaled by spears and bled out, dying soon after. Renee and the others returned, but it was too late. The losses were already counted, 5 more gone. Feeling the tension rise, Gregoire moved the survivors to higher ground. When they reached a new elevation, they were amazed to find a smaller version of the indigo tree before them. Renee noticed that something was affecting the chroma in the area as they made their way to the cliff's edge. Once there, they saw 2 slopes leading down like broad steps, and Gregoire urged Renee to make camp nearby. She agreed, and the expeditioners settled in for the night in relative safety. The next morning, the group pressed higher into a maze of caverns and broken cliffs. Eventually, they reached the entrance to a narrow cave. They walked its winding, shadowed passageways, moving slowly and carefully until they emerged into a small alcove overlooking the horizon. In the clearing, they found the remnants of a large building fused into the rock, and in front of it stood a massive white Nevron called a jar. The team readied themselves to attack, but Renee stopped them as she realized the jar was not hostile. The entire group was shocked when the white Nevron began to speak, talking to them about a light. Gregoire strongly advised against further interaction, insisting they move on, but Renee was too intrigued and immediately began recording her observations into her journal.
Expedition 81, Renee. Huge discovery. This is the first Nevron with whom we've been able to communicate. It seems stuck in this cave. Gregoire is, as usual, deeply suspicious, but this could change our entire understanding of Nevrons and the Painters.
In the middle of her recording, tragedy struck again. A giant Nevron appeared and killed Renee instantly. The Nevron then lashed out at the remaining expeditioners, impaling them one by one as the white Nevron simply watched, unmoving. The team fought desperately, but the monstrous attacker proved far too powerful. One by one they fell, until only Gregoire remained. Gregoire faced the Nevron without fear. In a final act of defiance, he managed to wrench its spear away and drive it back, pinning it against the building. But his stand came at a cost. Glowing vines erupted from the Nevron, emanating from a much larger Nevron called an Avec. The vines wrapped around both the impaled Nevron and Gregoire himself, draining their chroma and petrifying them, forever immortalizing Gregoire's last stand in stone and vine. Expedition 81's journey ended in an instant, with only their journal and the path they carved left behind to tell their story. Another year passed, and with it, yet another failed expedition. While there is no flag or journal to be found for this attempt, I still believe that Expedition 80 was launched, only to fail before making it any farther than the falls on the far side of the caves. Their journey, like others before them, ended almost as soon as it began, lost to history with no trace remaining but the memory of an effort that never reached its goal. In Monolith Year 79, Lumiere achieved a technological breakthrough, the creation of the airship. This marvel of engineering would, in theory, allow them to safely cross the world and reach the Paintress. The Council dispatched a single vessel, designating it and its crew as Expedition 79. As they set out, Lumiere continued to develop an entire armada, both to send a larger force if Expedition 79 failed, and to protect the city while their airship traveled. Sailing high above the ground, the crew of Expedition 79 found themselves safe from the Nevrons below. From their vantage, they looked down upon the strange, haunting beauty left in the wake of the fracture. Based on where their journey ended, we can safely speculate that they sailed across the first major landmass, passing slowly over the dark gestural arena and glimpsing the tall, mysterious tower in the distance. Clea, observing this from her workshop in the tower, could not allow the Lumerians to reach their goal. She worked relentlessly until she created the Serpent Fair, a giant, brightly colored serpent with a lighthouse for a head. As Expedition 79 floated past the tower, Clair unleashed her new guardian of the skies. The Serpent Fair attacked the airship, and despite their best efforts to evade, the expeditioners were forced toward a white floating island blanketed in red foliage, what would later be known as the Crimson Forest. They fought back and tried to outmaneuver the beast, but the Serpent Fair proved too powerful, blasting the ship and sending it spiraling out of control into the red forest below. The airship crashed hard at the edge of one of the island's many floating cliffs, its hull split open like an egg. Many survived the crash and quickly helped the wounded. Searching the wreckage, they gathered every bit of supplies they could find, hoping that if they could not escape, they might at least make the area livable for the year they had left before the next Gamage. The supplies were brought down and arranged around the base of the crash site. Determined to find answers, they sent out a large contingent of expeditioners with their own supplies to scout ahead. Using the airship's anchor, they carefully climbed down and methodically ferried supplies to lower ground. They salvaged scraps from the ship to build platforms, making it possible to traverse the floating cliffs of the region. Another group created handholds and descended to a lower area, opening up another path through the island. Below, they found a cave for storing supplies and left a team behind while the rest pressed onward. The main group reached a large white archway and planted an Expedition 79 flag, not only to mark their journey, but to leave record of where they had been in the labyrinth of floating islands that now surrounded them. They split into two more groups, with many members continuing to find small alcoves and caves to use for shelter and to store supplies. The first group made their way higher up a long, narrow trail. The path was carpeted in red grass and plants. As they climbed, they took note of the white stone pathway, perhaps wondering who had carved the trail they now followed. Throughout the area, they noticed more of the rectangular structures they had seen before, each with small rectangular cutouts, almost resembling miniature towers in a fortress. Near the top of the path, they found themselves among a surprising mix of yellow leaves. At the end of the trail stood a large statue of a creature holding a sword. Despite having encountered no Nevrons during their time marooned on the island, and although the statue reminded them of one, curiosity got the best of them, and they activated the switch on the statue. Suddenly, the island was cast in a dark red hue. Across the island, the expeditioners found themselves surrounded by Nevrons, as if the creatures had been hiding behind an invisible veil that was now lifted. Panic and chaos erupted as fighting broke out. The Nevrons began to slaughter the expeditioners one by one. Some stood their ground and fought, while others attempted to flee. The Nevrons spared no one, their onslaught merciless and complete. The expeditioners on the high path were silenced, their lives ended by the mere push of a button. Meanwhile, on the lower path, another group planted an Expedition 79 flag as they entered a large open area with a central pool of swirling chroma. 3 large statues of Nevrons identical to the ones that had just attacked them stood watch over the pool. The team managed to activate 2 more statues, which returned the area's hue to its original state, but the Nevrons remained visible and continued to roam. A fierce battle ensued. The expeditioners managed to kill all the Nevrons near the chroma pool, their bodies left strewn across the ground. The commander stood over the pool, drawn by something emanating from within. As he investigated further, he unwittingly summoned a powerful Nevron, the chromatic gold Chevalier. Flanked by 2 smaller Nevrons, Clair and Obscur, it attacked with a ferocity for which the expeditioners were unprepared. Despite fighting with everything they had, the expeditioners were ultimately defeated. The 3 Nevrons likely rampaged through the forest, killing any last survivors, whether they were hiding in the caverns or had been left behind with the ship. None escaped their fate. Once the massacre ended, the statues reset, and the 3 deadly Nevrons sank back into the pool, waiting to be summoned again. Expedition 79 may have been able to survive until their Gamage, but their curiosity proved their undoing. In the end, their mission failed, and the people of Lumiere were left to endure the sorrow of another Gamage. After the Gamage of Monolith Year 78, the Council decided against sending out their newly built armada of airships. Having invested so many resources into constructing the fleet, they were reluctant to risk losing the remainder after the loss of just 1 ship. The Council instructed Expedition 78's commander, Maxence, to stand down, announcing there would be no expedition. They explained the armada would remain in Lumiere to bolster the city's defenses against further attacks, while they sought answers about the mystery of the Paintress at home. Maxence was appalled by what he saw as the Council's cowardice, and resolved to act on his own. He gathered his expeditioners, and together they agreed that something had to be done. They boarded the airships, prepped them for flight, and stole them from the Council's grasp, setting out on their mission to stop the Paintress once and for all. As they left the city, flying a fleet of around 100 airships, Maxence recorded his decision in his journal for posterity.
The 78, Maxence. Stealing the airships. But we knew we had to try, and it worked. We deserve strong leaders, not those old fools on the council hiding under the dome. Under their control, our people are condemned to a slow, inevitable extinction. Their timid half-steps achieve nothing. The answers are not in Lumiere. They are out here. Our only choice is to take matters into our own hands. Fortune favors the bold. We must forge ahead with conviction.
Maxence ordered the airships to take different routes, hoping to cover more ground and either find survivors or gather clues to complete their mission. 2 airships veered west after passing the land barrier, heading toward an area whose sky was surrounded by a strange purple hue. As they approached, they saw enormous Nevrons, creatures the size of mountains, devouring the landscape below. Doing their best to avoid the massive threats, the airships cautiously navigated around them. In a valley below, they spotted the remains of a fairground and some nearby dilapidated buildings. Deciding to investigate, they steered toward the location, but the decision proved disastrous. The airships strayed too close to the giant Nevrons and were struck down by their colossal hands, crashing at the base of the mountains just beyond the ruined structures. Trapped, the survivors salvaged whatever supplies they could from the wreckage and descended into the valley. They pitched tents and began to search for any sign of help or a solution to their predicament. Their efforts were in vain. No help came, and the area yielded no answers. While there is no further evidence of their ultimate fate, it is reasonable to suspect that they either ran out of supplies, fell to the Nevrons nearby, or perished in the next Kamaj. The rest of Expedition 78 pressed onward, crossing the ocean and navigating the scattered land masses that lay ahead. For a time, their journey seemed to progress without incident, until they encountered the same arbiter of terror that had doomed Expedition 79, the dreaded Serpent Fair. The massive serpent, spotting the fleet of airships, began its relentless assault. The airships did what they could to evade, but the Serpent Fair systematically targeted and took them down. 7 of the ships were chased into the western area, known as the Stone Wave Cliff Caves. There, the creature blasted several ships, crippling them and causing them to crash throughout the cavern system. Some tried to maneuver to the opening on the far side of the cave, but the passage was too tight, and those that did make it through smashed into the cliff face, sealing the fate of all who had tried to escape that way. Serpent Fair's rampage was not over. It exited the cave system and returned to attack the remaining fleet. Maxence, leading a group of about 12 airships, faced the onslaught head-on. The first 2 ships tried to evade, but ended up crashing into the dangerous cliffs to the east. Survivors from the wreckage salvaged what supplies they could and pitched tents, but it would not be enough. Their fates were sealed amid the harsh landscape. Within the winding stone pathways of the Stone Wave Cliffs, Serpent Fair forced airship after airship down, scattering survivors throughout the area. The first of these survivors planted an Expedition 78 flag as a waypoint, then pressed on through a narrow passageway. Rounding a corner, they entered a wide area and saw the wreckage of many other airships nearby. It quickly became clear they were not alone. The commotion had attracted Nevrons to the region, large rock Nevrons and hooded ones wielding giant swords. Some survivors tried to hide within the wreckage, but a Nevron entered and attacked. The expeditioner fought bravely, but was ultimately impaled by the creature. Others rushed to help, but arrived too late. They managed to kill the Nevron, but the loss was already suffered. Elsewhere, Maxence and his crew emerged from a nearby wreck in a small alcove, where they immediately set up tents and searched for other survivors. When they left the alcove, they drew the attention of more Nevrons, who wasted no time in attacking their camp. The expeditioners fought back, but the Nevrons proved too strong. Many fell in the camp, but Maxence and his lieutenants managed to escape to the wreckage of their ship. Their escape was short-lived. They ran into yet another group of Nevrons and were soon surrounded. One by one, the expeditioners were killed, each bleeding out and then turning to stone, their final moments forever preserved in the landscape. Though Maxence, the commander of Expedition 78, had fallen, their story did not end here. On the northern side of the cliffs, several more airships went down, most of them crashing into the ocean and succumbing to its treacherous currents. Any who may have survived the wreckage were drowned in the waters for their trouble. 2 additional airships crashed into the cliffside, one of which was completely split in half. The survivors from these crashes used the wreckage to construct a makeshift ladder, climbing to higher ground and finding their way into a large cave system. Unfortunately, 2 of the expeditioners were not able to climb out in time to escape the Nevrons that pursued them. Attempting to hide in the wreckage, they instead became trapped, and the Nevrons finished them off, sealing their fate with petrification. The second airship crashed hard into a nearby cavern system, punching a hole into the cave ceiling and letting in daylight for the first time. Survivors gathered what they could, both people and supplies, and joined up with those who had climbed into the cave from the other wreck. Their luck ran out. They were unaware that Nevrons were already waiting inside. The creatures struck, and the entire group was killed, their stories lost to the darkness of the cave. Another airship went down near the lighthouse. Though the waters were rough, 6 expeditioners managed to survive and scale the cliffs. Spotting the lighthouse and desperate for rescue, they made their way toward the structure, determined to light it and signal to any remaining airships that they were still alive. But as they neared the lighthouse, something awaited them that filled them with terror. A Nevron, composed of countless arms and holding many lanterns, had awoken and descended upon them. This was Clair's favorite creation, known as the Lampmaster. The expeditioners were completely outmatched. No matter how fiercely they fought, the Lampmaster was too powerful. In the end, it was the Lampmaster who stood victorious, leaving the expeditioners petrified in their own blood, their hope extinguished in the shadow of the lighthouse. The remainder of the fleet pressed on, branching further apart in a desperate attempt to put distance between themselves and the dreaded Serpent Fair. One group of airships veered northeast, eventually arriving near the floating island known as Sky Island. Though they believed they were gaining ground, the reach of the beast was far greater than they imagined. As the 4 ships passed over the island, Serpent Fair unleashed a devastating blast that struck all of them. 2 of the airships and their crew were completely eradicated by the attack. The other 2 were torn in half, but managed to crash onto the floating island, where the survivors slowly emerged from the wreckage while the beast moved on in pursuit of the next group in the fleet. As with so many before them, the survivors gathered what supplies they could and set up camps around the island, hoping to find a way to survive or continue their mission. Working together, they constructed grapple points to connect their camps, but there was no way down from the airborne prison. As they consolidated their resources, they were interrupted by the appearance of a massive Nevron called the Chromatic Glacé. The creature was enormous, with a viscous green substance dripping from its body, some of which had already been used to merge with part of one of the crashed airships. One by one, the Chromatic Glacé attacked the surviving expeditioners, spewing its green substance and trapping many within it, feeding on their chroma and growing even stronger. One crew member, still above, was caught off guard and fell, becoming entangled in the rope they had used to lower supplies, and was easy prey for the Nevron. The creature leapt down to a makeshift camp at the edge of the floating island, cornering more survivors. Some managed to escape, but those who were less fortunate were crushed and petrified on the spot. The Chromatic Glacé turned its attention toward the remaining expeditioners, stalking them as they fled up the stairs. Many tried to run over and hide among their crates and barrels, hoping to protect what little they had left, but this decision would prove fatal. The Chromatic Glacé approached, and as the expeditioners stood their ground, it unleashed a torrent of attacks. They fought back as best they could, but were petrified 2 or 3 at a time. The last few made a desperate attempt to flee, but with nowhere to go, the massive Nevron eventually caught and killed them, leaving them petrified in a final state of terror. Meanwhile, the Serpent Fair continued its relentless assault on the remaining airships. One of the largest groups, consisting of about 20 ships, set their course westward toward the region known as the Reacher. Their journey was tragically short-lived, as Serpent Fair remained hot on their trail. In their attempt to escape, they headed toward the floating island known as the Floating Cemetery. They nearly reached their destination, but the giant serpent unleashed volley after volley of violent attacks. One after another, the airships were torn open, their crews instantly annihilated by the beast. Out of the 20 airships, only 2 managed to remain intact. One crashed down onto the roof of the church, while the other floated just above the island's surface. The crew that landed atop the church set up camp inside the attic, while the others disembarked and helped their companions down from the floating airship. As they regrouped, they followed a set of stone stairs and soon discovered a flag from Expedition Zero planted nearby, realizing they had stumbled onto the trail of the very first expedition. Their astonishment was brief, as they soon became aware that their presence had awakened a host of Nevrons known as Chalier, each wielding massive weapons. The expeditioners engaged these formidable foes in a desperate battle, determined to rid the floating island of this scourge. Blow after blow was exchanged, but the Nevrons began to overwhelm them. Expeditioners were decapitated, losing arms and limbs as they fought valiantly, felling some of the Nevrons, but succumbing to their own injuries, their bodies piling up. The group managed to defeat one Chalier and rushed to confront the next threat, trying to protect one another by engaging in mass combat. The fighting spread to the old graveyard, where the final stand of this group of expeditioners took place. Surrounded by more than a dozen Nevrons, the slaughter continued. One expeditioner after another was cleaved apart, the bodies mounting as the battle raged on. At last, after the final blow had been struck, all the expeditioners and Nevrons lay dead. All but one. Among the Chalier was one that was entirely white and lacked any passion for battle. In a gesture of reverence, it gathered the bodies of the fallen expeditioners and piled them into a large mound, arranging the helmets and weapons of his fallen brethren in a circle around the dead. This Nevron remained, keeping a silent vigil over the fallen for the next 45 years, until the arrival of Expedition 33. The final 13 ships of the once 100-strong armada watched in horror looking toward the floating cemetery as Serpent Fair decimated the fleet in the distance. They had just broken away from the above ruins of Old Lumiere, desperate to escape the carnage. But the Serpent's attention was now fixed on its last set of prey. The remaining airships made a desperate dash for the monolith, their only hope lying just ahead on the horizon. As they soared out over the ocean, the survivors' hopes were dashed. The destination was within sight, but it was about to be torn from their grasp. Serpent Fair unleashed another devastating blast, forcing 3 of the ships to crash onto the shores near Old Lumiere. The rest pushed forward at full speed, but it did them no good. With one final assault, the mighty Serpent finished off what remained of the great airship armada. The remnants of the fleet crashed into the sea between Visage and Seren Islands, falling just miles short of their destination. The survivor from the ships that landed off the coast of Old Lumiere set up camp, rationed their supplies, and spent their final months on the shoreline, watching helplessly as the Paintress rose and enacted the next Gamage. Expedition 78 had begun as a rebellion, a desperate, bold move to take the Armada straight to the Paintress in a direct confrontation. But their haste proved fatal, and their actions led them to be hunted, one by one, by the terror of the seas and skies, Serpent Fair, who would remain an ever-looming threat for every expedition that followed. There's absolutely no evidence of journals or flags for Expeditions 77 through 71, or even any indication that they were launched after the airship Armada was stolen and the Gamage continued to return. Still, I believe that these expeditions did exist, and that all of them met their fate in a single location, a fate that would be uncovered by the next expedition we will be covering. Recognizing the need for a new approach, the Council decided to begin launching more logistical missions, aiming to make future passage across the continent easier for subsequent expeditions. The first of these was the legendary Expedition 70, whose mission was to carve a path for all those who would come after. Expedition 70 departed the harbors of Lumiere, equipped with the largest supply of ropes, handholds, and grapple points ever assembled for an expedition. The commander, Charlotte, led her crew of brave expeditioners toward the land barrier and the cave that would mark the start of their journey. After successfully splashing down from the falls at the cave's exit, they sailed to the eastern side of the dark shores. Their destination was an area that had caught their attention, the glowing blue light of the indigo tree. Charlotte likely reasoned that if it attracted their notice, it had likely drawn other expeditions as well, and would be a logical path for any who would come after them. She led her team through rugged terrain until they reached a large waterfall and a long, winding path of stone and grass. Gathering their gear, they set out on foot, with Charlotte likely ordering her lieutenant to sail along the coast and wait for her signal to pick them up. As they traveled along the path, they came upon a large stone arch and a strange bronze statue. Continuing toward the archway, they noticed several odd spears embedded in the ground. Drawing closer, they discovered pools of blood nearby, prompting a brief debate about their next move. Charlotte made the call to break out the ropes, handholds, and grapple points, and celebrated as they attached the first grapple point of their journey. The remnants of this gear can still be seen in the area, marking their achievement for future expeditions to witness. After clearing the cliff face and reaching the top, they saw a large stone Nevron with shields for hands roaming nearby. Standing their ground, they fought it off, using some of the spears they had found earlier to defeat the Nevron. Sadly, The battle cost them the life of the first member of their expedition. They took a moment to mourn, but Charlotte, upholding the expeditioner's motto, "When one falls, we continue," urged them forward. They pressed forward until they reached another small cliff. Charlotte sent the team ahead to install the necessary handholds before climbing. Upon reaching the summit and looking down the path ahead, they were greeted by a sight for which they were wholly unprepared, a vision that shook them to their core and revealed the true dangers that awaited them throughout the rest of their journey. As they slowly advanced, some members of the group were undoubtedly left in shock by the gruesome sight that awaited them. A path lined with impaled, petrified expeditioners marking the trail to a distant cave ahead. It is my belief that in this moment they stumbled upon the fate of Expeditions 77 through 71. Each of these teams had entered the area only to meet total and tragic annihilation at the hands of a formidable Nevron. Much like the duelist from the Forgotten Battlefield, this Nevron would appear and leave the area randomly, and I suspect it simply was not present when Expedition 70 passed through. The group pressed on, forced to walk through this corridor of horror, staring in disbelief and dread at the countless dead that lined their way. Charlotte, no doubt, did all she could to keep her team motivated, urging them to continue as they entered the cave itself. Inside, they were met with even greater horror. Endless stacks of petrified bodies scattered throughout the cave, many of them tangled in a viscous web of chroma, as if something was still feeding off their remains to this very day. The bodies extended deep into the darkness, the sight seemingly almost endless, but eventually, Expedition 70 emerged from the cave and stepped out into the sunlight on the other side. Continuing along the path traversed by Expedition 81, they stumbled upon the expedition's flag at a three-way split in the cliffside trails. Charlotte sent some of her best ahead to scout and install as many grapples and handholds as they could. One scout took the high ground, following the cliff's edge, until she spotted a small crevice and made her way toward it. Squeezing through, she saw her next objective and proceeded to install 3 handholds, climbing up the side of the cliff. At the top, she scaled beneath several small waterfalls, edged along the cliff, and, with rope and grapple in hand, reached another ledge and installed the next grapple point. She continued placing 4 more handholds to access an even higher path, determined to make the way safer for future expeditions. When she reached a series of natural steps, she pressed on and made camp for the night. The next morning, she found another promising spot for a grapple, but as she began to install it, a Nevron struck and severed her arm. She managed to grapple back down, leaving it only partially installed, and made it back to her camp area, but it was too late. She bled out in agony as her body began to petrify, leaving behind another marker of bravery and loss on the trail. They laid many other trails throughout the area and eventually regrouped with Charlotte and the rest of the expedition. As they pressed forward, they came across one of Expedition 81's former campsites and found the petrified remains of some of its members close by. Though the sight was always sobering, the group pressed on, continuing to install more handholds in a nearby cliff face. When they reached the top, they entered a small cave that eventually opened up into a wide alcove. To their shock, they discovered more remains from Expedition 81, including their commander. They no doubt read the journal left behind, then continued winding their path through the cavern, stepping over petrified bodies and the remnants of blood and ink. Exiting the cave, they were greeted by the sight of the giant indigo tree, glowing in all its luminescent glory. The cliff paths below were covered in glowing blue grass, and several small Nevrons roamed the area. The group split up, setting up campsites throughout the region, some near cliff edges, others in caves or small nooks in the stone cliffs. Yet, the threat of the roaming Nevrons was ever present. Several members of Expedition 70 were ambushed and killed at these campsites, their petrified remains marking their final struggles. After placing all the grapples they could and losing 3 more members, Charlotte and her teams approached the open area beneath the indigo tree and planted an Expedition 70 flag. They pressed on, making their way through an opening in the trunk of the tree. Upon reaching the top, they believed they were finally through the worst of it, but disaster struck again. One of their own was suddenly surprised and stabbed through the back, impaled on a branch of the tree. The others quickly gathered their gear, managed to either escape or defeat the Nevron, and exited the spring meadows, carrying with them the scars and the progress of their journey. After leaving the meadows, the group headed north toward a cluster of large red trees. Navigating carefully, they managed to avoid several roaming Nevrons along the way and eventually reached the entrance of the forest. Sharing a look of determination, they nodded to one another and pressed into the area known as the Ancient Sanctuary. Upon arrival, they discovered the sanctuary teeming with large, wooden mechanical constructs, each filled with chattering gestrels. Charlotte quickly decided it was safest to avoid the machines entirely, so the group took a side path along a nearby cliff. They installed a series of grapples and carefully made their way down and around the main route. Surprisingly, the expeditioners passed through the sanctuary without any losses. Viewing this as a much-needed victory, Charlotte led the team in planting an Expedition 70 flag near the sanctuary's exit. They continued on, following the string of lamps until they reached a clearing, where a strange, giant bell stood at the end of the path. The group rested for the night near the exit, then set out again the next morning. While there is no direct evidence to confirm whether they visited the Gestural village, it seems likely that they at least stopped by before moving on. Continuing north, they eventually reached the shoreline. Charlotte signaled for their ship, and when their lieutenant saw it cut across the sky, the team made their way to the rendezvous point. She flagged the ship down, reloaded all of the remaining supplies, and the expedition set out across the vast sea, uncertain of what awaited them on the other side. They eventually landed on the second large landmass just before the final sea near the forgotten battlefield in Minoko Station. Having successfully avoided attracting the attention of Serpent Fair, they likely followed their established routine, disembarking and sending the ship around to meet them on the far side. Once again, there are no flags or concrete evidence marking the exact path they took across the vast expanse of this new landmass. However, what is known is that after traversing it, they reached the northern shores just outside of Old Lumiere and beyond the ice-capped mountains of the Frozen Hearts. From there, they reboarded their ship and set a direct course for their final destination, the monolith. The chroma barrier surrounding the monolith had not yet been restored after Simon's destruction of it some 30 years prior, allowing Expedition 70 to land directly on its shores. Upon arrival, they encountered the winding path of candles and were confronted by the overwhelming presence of the paintress, weeping at the monolith's base. Knowing that the Gamage was approaching, they collected their supplies and prepared themselves, determined to complete their mission. They advanced even closer to the monolith and discovered an entrance. Whether a natural opening or some kind of portal remains unknown. Without hesitation, they entered and didn't look back. Inside, they found themselves in a vast stone cavern. As they took in their surroundings, they noticed empty floating canvases, and in the distance, what appeared to be Lumiere's crooked tower. Approaching the cave's exit, they planted another Expedition 70 flag and set to work. The team came to the edge of a great chasm and worked together to cross, installing grapple points as they went. Their path eventually brought them to a distorted version of the Spring Meadows. There, they marveled at the strange beauty of the place, and despite the presence of larger and more dangerous Nevrons than they had ever encountered, managed to avoid any conflict. Dividing into 3 separate paths, they installed as many handholds and grapples as they could, making the way easier for those who might follow. Continuing on, they reached a distorted version of the Flying Waters, a place for which there was no evidence that they had previously traveled. They planted another Expedition 70 flag before moving northward, where Charlotte believed she saw a promising location for camp and to shelter their supplies. Her instincts proved correct. They discovered a small alcove guarded by a strange, almost golden fence. After piling up their gear and supplies, they explored the area for more places to install grapples and handholds. One expeditioner strayed too far and reached a dead end. Without warning, a Nevron struck, impaling the expeditioner in the back with its sword. He collapsed and bled out, eventually petrifying, his fate unknown to the others. The expedition pressed onward, eventually finding themselves in a distorted version of the ancient sanctuary, still filled with red trees and sakapatats. Finding no need for grapples here, they continued through and settled in small alcoves for the rest of the night. While they slept, a Nevron crept in and killed one of the expeditioners in her sleep, giving her no chance to react. Undeterred, the survivors moved on to another unfamiliar area, this time a twisted version of the Stone Wave Cliffs. But the deeper they ventured into the monolith, the greater the dangers became, and the losses continued to mount. The path soon split, and in accordance with protocol, one member of the team broke off to install additional grapple points. He left the safety of the group and made his way down toward the lighthouse at the bottom of the ravine. Carefully slipping past several Nevrons, he finally reached his destination, but it was already too late. Cornered by a Nevron, he tried to escape, but was stabbed in the back and left petrified, hanging over the rail. The rest of the group pressed on. As they reached the top of a nearby hill, they encountered even more Nevrons gathered near a marble fireplace. They fought hard to fend off the creatures, and though the battle was fierce, and they emerged victorious, 2 more expeditioners fell victim to the attack, left petrified, their fear forever etched in stone. Determined, the remaining members of Expedition 70 continued, doing their best to keep their spirits high. As they exited the area, they lost yet another member to a random Nevron attack at the edge of the path. No doubt, the expeditioner was likely stationed there as a lookout. They planted their last expedition flag and pushed forward until reaching a distorted version of the region known as the Frozen Hearts. This area, too, was filled with Nevrons, but the team continued their routine, splitting off to lay as many handholds and grapples as possible. The work was treacherous. Some members completed their assignments, but others fell victim to their own lack of situational awareness, while others were simply unable to overcome the Nevrons that had isolated them from the group, trapping them with no real hope of escape. Even those who moved forward with the main contingent faced ambushes, losing limbs, bleeding out, and ultimately petrifying where they fell. Eventually, the survivors encountered a faceless boy standing before a golden train, who claimed his mother had just bought it for him. He offered to take them to Lumiere, and Charlotte agreed. The remaining members of the team boarded the train and departed for Lumiere, though it was only a distorted echo of the home they remembered. They arrived at the amber-hued streets of the city they once knew and had long since missed. The group made their way through the fountain area, but their brief moment of solace was quickly broken as they realized the city was now overrun with Nevrons. They did their best to avoid the roaming threats and soon reached the vast chasms that split the city apart. Charlotte and the others split up, leaving behind grapples and handholds for those who would follow in the years to come, determined to complete their mission before the Gamage. One expeditioner broke off toward a large chasm and discovered a lone harp near a chair at the edge. He paused to study the instrument, likely taking in the view of the trail they had just forged. But his respite was short-lived. He was ambushed by a Nevron, and his body fell. He was petrified on the spot. Only 4 members remained from Charlotte's expedition. Sensing they were nearing the end, Charlotte sent one expeditioner to stand lookout down an alley facing the main plaza, which was crawling with Nevrons, while she and the other 2 searched for a way to circle around the back. Along the way, they encountered a Grandis, likely trapped inside the monolith, probably deciding to assist them in their efforts. All the last grapples leading to the top of the monolith were installed, but before they could celebrate, they were attacked by several Nevrons. The lookout in the alley stood no chance and was quickly overwhelmed, while the others fought valiantly. Though they won the immediate battle, the cost was too great, and the survivors soon succumbed to their injuries. As her strength faded, Charlotte managed to make one final entry in her journal.
Charlotte, 70. We finally installed the last set of grapple points, with only days to spare. And for the first time, I feel real hope. This is our gift for all the expeditions to come. I am incredibly proud of our team. The interior of the monolith is perhaps the harshest landscape we've encountered. The final set of grapple points were excruciatingly complex to place and required painstaking focus and skill. But we were bold. We were ambitious, and we refused to stop. There's no other group of people I'd rather be with, and it is an honor to die by their side. It is fitting that we greet our end together within the monolith that has loomed over us for so long. Though this Nevron has won the battle, the expeditions shall win the war. Tomorrow is here.
Their ropes and grapples remained scattered across the ground, alongside the body of their grandest companion. In the end, they died where they fell, but they died as heroes. Expedition 70 endured every hardship and accomplished the task set before them, laying down an eternal path for those who come after. Expedition 69 began with the same task as Expedition 70, to install more handholds and grapples across the continent. However, they were also given an additional mission, to map various areas and regions throughout the continent. Their motto became, laying the trail for those who come after. There is little evidence of flags or markers from the start of their journey, but it is clear that they made significant progress across the continent. They likely took similar water routes, while interior teams laid handholds and grapple paths along the way. Eventually, they spotted an island in the distance, covered in countless faces, later known as Visage Island. Upon reaching a vast open field, they planted an Expedition 69 flag at its center. Before them, 4 distinct paths stretched out, and they decided to split into 2 groups, each group tasked with laying grapple points and handholds along their chosen route before meeting back up. The first group took the far right path, placing several handholds to help the rest of the team descend below. There, they found what appeared to be the veins of lava seeping through the earth and a large, angry mask. Summoning their courage, they approached the mask, only to be pulled inside its mouth and spit out into a different part of the island. The environment glowed with a red hue, and the air was thick with palpable anger. They planted another Expedition 69 flag, but any comfort they found was fleeting. Almost immediately, they were set upon by hordes of fiery, enraged Nevrons. Panic erupted as wave after wave of Nevrons attacked, burning the expeditioners to petrified ashen husks. Though they fought back, felling whatever Nevrons they could, they were hopelessly outnumbered. Trapped at a dead end, the group was consumed by fire and reduced to ash. Meanwhile, another large group took the far left path, only to be pursued by more fiery Nevrons. Many were burned to ash, their bodies piling up as they desperately tried to fight back. Those who failed left behind a trail of scorched remains for others to see as they fled. Eventually, the survivors reached a raised area where they became cornered. The heat from the creatures' attacks was so intense, their petrified remains were nearly fused together. The last group tried to escape by running down the hill, but their fate was already sealed. Reaching an alcove of collapsed buildings, they were quickly incinerated. The final expeditioner in this group dashed into the cave, hoping to find refuge from her pursuers. Her attempt was in vain. Trapped at the edge of a cliff, surrounded by Nevrons, she no doubt begged for her life as the creatures showed no mercy. She was burned alive, left as an ashen statue, her screams forever frozen in stone. Meanwhile, the second group took the far left path from the central region of the island. They discovered a vast, beautiful open meadow that led them to a joyful-looking mask. As they approached, the mask opened wide, sucking them in and spitting them out into a different area of the island. Upon arrival, they planted an Expedition 69 flag to mark their presence. In this new area, they encountered many strange-looking Nevrons. None seemed interested in the expeditioners, and instead remained in a state of joyful dancing. The group spread out, scouting ahead and seeking places to install new handholds. During this brief period of peace, one of the expedition members, Fleur, took the opportunity to write an excerpt in her journal.
69th Expedition, Fleur. Good thing Anthony upgraded all the climbing handholds. Not only are they much easier to install in the cliff faces, they're also a lot nicer to use. We're setting the last few handholds tomorrow. Then we can finally get out of these caverns and see the sun again. I can't wait to rejoin the mountaineering team. I still remember that first mountain we scaled. Watching the sun rise above the clouds was magical. But rappelling down as we set the handholds was pure exhilaration. I know some of the others chafe at being restricted to recon only. I get it's not very satisfying making maps and prepping trails while people are dying. But this prep work will pay off in the long run. It may not be glamorous, but truly essential work rarely is. Doesn't make it any less important. And as the Expedition 69 motto says, we are literally laying a trail for the ones who come after. Step by step, handhold by handhold, each expedition carries the next one forward.
Moments later, an unsettling green mist began to descend through the area, enclosing each path in fog. Panic swept through the expeditioners as they started to scream, their bodies slowly transforming into vines and flowers from being grabbed through the very surface they walked on. One by one, they succumbed to the growing vines, calling out for help as it spread through their ranks. In the chaos, Fleur and the others, assuming the Nevrons were responsible, attacked, breaking the joyful spell of the creatures and provoking them to retaliate. Overpowered, Fleur and her companions were defeated. As they bled out, they became petrified, while others continued to morph into a trail of shrubbery and blossoms. 2 more expeditioners met a similar fate further down the path, as they too broke the trance of one of the joyful creatures and were both cut down, one of them with the blade still plunged into their gut. When the final expeditioner succumbed to the phenomena, Expedition 69's journey ended in tragedy. their fate marked by silence and the strange new growths that took their place. Expedition 68 was also a logistical expedition, setting out the following year. They departed from the docks of Lumiere, with a hopeful crowd bidding them farewell and watching as they began their journey. Suddenly, a massive storm appeared out of nowhere, sweeping the ship up on the high seas and eventually lifting it into the air, never to be seen again by those in Lumiere. The people left behind at the docks were horrified and disheartened, but the journey of the expedition did not end there. The ship soared high above the first major landmass before crashing down into the mountainous region known as Yellow Harvest. The wreckage, surprisingly intact, lay across the rock face. Though many lives were lost to the storm and the chaos of the crash, some managed to survive. They gathered their survivors, including their commander, Elodie, and quickly made plans to continue their mission, determined to let nothing stand in their way. After collecting their supplies and making camp to decide on their next steps, disaster struck again. 2 members of the group were attacked by strange-looking Nevrons, and each suffered a fatal blow, collapsing and turning to stone. The group mourned the losses only briefly before Elodie rallied them to continue pressing forward. They navigated a narrow, winding cavern system, placing an Expedition 68 flag to mark their progress. Eventually, they made their way down the mountainside, moving steadily towards what they hoped would be a way out and back into the open world. They planted yet another Expedition 68 flag as they traveled, pushing onward. After finally finding an exit, and after a long day of travel, they decided to make camp. That night, believing they were in relative safety, they let down their guard. In the darkness, they were attacked again. Many were killed in their sleep, their petrified remains frozen in their final moments of rest. Others, waking in panic, were ensnared by a white viscous substance from a strange Nevron, their bodies still tangled in it to this day. Elodie sounded the alarm, and though they lost many more during the ensuing battle, the survivors ultimately prevailed. Scaling the last cliff, they were attacked once more, losing another expeditioner, but managing to overcome the threat. They placed another Expedition 68 flag near the entrance, gathered what supplies they could, and exited the area, carrying both the scars and the resolve of those who had pressed on. The next phase of their journey is somewhat confusing, and the best explanation I can offer why Elodie led the group where she did is that they were disoriented, unsure of which direction was safest. She led them around the ancient sanctuary and eventually into the flying waters, where their remains would later be discovered by Expedition 33. Upon entering this new region, the expeditioners were awestruck by the surreal beauty of their surroundings. But their wonder was short-lived, as they were once again attacked. As the group pressed forward, 2 members stayed behind to study a shipwreck and its anchor, noting that the anchor did not appear to be man-made. They were attacked by several Nevrons, and though they managed to prevail, both eventually collapsed near each other, succumbing to their injuries and petrifying in place. Throughout the area, they tried to establish various encampments to store their supplies, but this proved perilous. The thick coverage of seaweed allowed Nevrons to strike from hiding, and the survivors were never safe for long. Eventually, they reached a vast open space containing another massive anchor and the remains of a dilapidated ship. As they moved through, curiosity led them to examine the anchor more closely, not just to determine what could have made such a huge object, but to gain a high vantage point for scouting ahead. A scout was sent forward, placing many handholds and using ropes to cross the nearby gap, installing several grapple points along the way. He reached the anchor and began to inspect it, but at that moment, several Nevrons attacked. The expeditioner atop the anchor was attacked, his hands severed, and he fell in agony, bleeding out and petrifying, unable to escape his fate. The rest of the expeditioners fought their way through, entering a large cavern system where Elodie planted another Expedition 68 flag. Again, they sought out alcoves for camping and storing supplies, but fell victim to ambushes from Nevrons concealed in the seaweed. Along the way, they found a large cavern opening. With food and supplies running low, Elodie sent a small team to descend and search for provisions, placing handholds to make the descent easier. As the team moved ahead, one member, driven by hunger, plucked a nearby mushroom and ate it. He immediately fell ill and died from the poisonous fungus. The rest made a mental note to avoid mushrooms in the future and pressed on, installing more handholds and grapples in an attempt to lay a trail around the many large Nevrons found deep within the cave. They made camp, scouted the area, and found nothing. Eventually, they were spotted and attacked, forced to flee as one member was gravely injured, collapsing before bleeding out. the survivors reached Elodie and delivered their report, and she encouraged them to push forward to the cavern ahead. Elodie soon spotted a strange Nevron, accompanied by smaller ones. She took a moment to record her observations in her journal before ordering the group to charge and try to defeat it.
Expedition 68, Elodie.
It's a miracle any of us survived. We were caught in the maelstrom and flung from wave to wave. We lost the moon and the stars, condemned to a never-ending darkness of punishing rain and raging clouds. The Paintress sent a storm to overcome us, but it is we who have overcome the storm. After surviving that, crushing those Nevrons was almost an afterthought. Strength and resilience, it's how we survived that storm, and it's how we grabbed victory. It wasn't even a battle. It was an ink bath. We squeezed those Nevs dry. But this new one looks tougher than the others.
The Nevrons proved too much. Elodie was struck down mid-sentence, petrified instantly, while her lieutenant was killed and his head was smashed in with an anchor. The remaining expeditioners fought valiantly against the strange Nevron, but it eviscerated them, leaving their bodies in a pool of ink and blood and stringing many of them up as their chroma was drained away. Much like the Nevron in the cave of the Spring Meadows, which I believe was responsible for the fate of Expeditions 77 through 71. Though it is only my speculation, I personally believe this Nevron moved on to the flying waters afterward. The lives of the expeditioners were cut tragically short, a valiant, hard-fought end for Expedition 68, but ultimately another failure etched into the annals of Lumerian history. Expedition 67 set out as another trailblazing expedition. They packed multiple handholds and grapples, but this time they brought with them a unique tool to help clear the way, a large supply of explosive ordnance. Departing from Lumire's harbor, they sailed through the land barrier cave. Like so many before them, the exact path of their early journey is difficult to trace, as no flags or evidence remain from the initial stages. It's likely they followed the trend of previous expeditions, eventually sailing east to a small channel and emerging northeast of the shores of Old Lumire. There, they saw the wreckage of Expedition 78's airships and the surreal, ornate structure of Seren Island on the horizon. Their commander, Luke, could hear a strange sound, almost like a song, emanating from the island. Believing it might aid their mission or give them some answers to the Paintress, they set a course for Seren Island, ready to explore. Inside, they were greeted by the sight and sound of a massive creature swaying and dancing, its presence almost hypnotic, almost enticing members of the expedition to walk right off the edge. Despite the allure, they managed to stay together and press forward. Along the way, they encountered a strange creature attached to a saucer-shaped cushion. Boarding it, they found that it transported them to different areas of the structure, and found many of these creatures scattered throughout the structure. Once they landed, one team veered left and used their explosives to blast a massive hole in a nearby wall, eventually carving a path to a lower edge. They installed handholds and began to climb down, but the noise from their blasting attracted the attention of several Nevrons, dubbed ballet. When the edge filled with these creatures, the team tried to ascend back through their hole, but one member was cut off, severely injured, and managed to crawl away before slowly petrifying. The survivors regrouped with Luke and decided to tunnel down to the next level to save time. Setting their charges, they created another tunnel, which took them deeper into the structure. Upon arrival, they planted their first Expedition 67 flag and pressed forward. They continued past the dancing Nevrons, blasting through more of the structure to make it easier to traverse. At every chasm or cliff face, they left behind chroma ropes, handholds, and grapple points. Though successful in paving the way, the sound of their explosive charges kept drawing more Nevrons to their position. Some expeditioners were killed on cliff sides they believed were safe, but their petrified remains prove otherwise. Still, they pressed on, blasting their way deeper into the island, laying more grapples across vast distances, and losing more members to sporadic Nevron attacks as their journey grew ever more perilous. Luke and the others heard a strange noise coming from the floor below them. Acting on instinct, Luke ordered his team to place a charge and blast a hole in the floor. Afterward, they fashioned a chroma rope and one by one descended into the depths below. They found a small alcove to their left, and as Luke led the way, he instructed his team to plant the next Expedition 60 flag in a nearby room. The flag was set, but unbeknownst to them, A Nevron had been drawn by the recent blast. It attacked suddenly, severing one expeditioner's hand, causing him to petrify instantly. His companion was thrown to the ground and severely injured, and she too soon succumbed to the petrification. Pressing into the large chamber, Luke and the others saw a giant white Nevron, tirelessly creating the smaller creatures that roamed the entire island. The massive Nevron paid them no mind, but not all of its creations were as indifferent. As new grapples were installed and the team pressed forward, a couple of the expeditioners were attacked and forced to flee to a small nook of yarn nearby. Despite their best efforts, they were cut down by the relentless Nevrons. Undeterred, the survivors blasted a much larger hole until daylight shone through. Pushing forward, they emerged onto a large balcony surrounded by several column structures. There, they planted another Expedition 67 flag as Luke dispatched teams to blast 3 separate routes, hoping to find a quicker way to the dancing Surrend at the structure's center. Suddenly, they were ambushed by a larger Nevron known as a glissando. It tore through the expeditioners as they attempted to lay their various routes with handholds and grapple points. Many were caught off guard by the creature's speed. Some lost limbs, others were thrown from the edges, and a few tried to hide, but it did not save them. One by one they fell, until only Luke and 2 others remained. Luke himself was attacked and lost his hand, but he pressed on with his remaining men. They hopped onto one of the floating transports, which carried them to the entrance of the center of the structure, where Surrend danced endlessly. They took what little supplies they had left and made camp, huddling together as Luke and the others continued to bleed out. Despite his injuries, Luke managed to walk over and plant one last Expedition 67 flag before returning to his crew, who were beginning to succumb. He knelt between them, and with his final bit of strength, recorded one last entry in his journal, reflecting on their experiences on the strange island.
Luke, Expedition 67. We're out of explosives, but we've made enough holes in this place to reach that giant woman in the center. But something weird's going on. Everyone's been swept up in strange emotions. It both feels like us, but also not like us. Marguerite reckons we're feeling the overflow from that giant woman's feelings. Empathic distress, I think she called it. Like her mind is flooding the area with her thoughts and feelings. Maybe we'll just stay here and enjoy the melody.
When his account was complete, the 3 of them gradually slipped into a peaceful trance, lulled by Surrend's hypnotic song. In that restful moment, they finally petrified, ending the journey of Expedition 67, their story preserved in stone for all who would come after. Expedition 66 was dispatched, presumably with the same logistical purpose as the other recent expeditions, to lay the trail further and make travel to the Paintress easier. They set out equipped with a basic supply of handholds and grapple points, heading for the land barrier cave entrance. When they emerged on the other side, they likely made landfall on the shore near the spring meadows. They began to trek across the landmass, and at some point suffered an accident that caused them to lose the majority of their food supply. The expeditioners' leader, Marcel, was faced with a dire situation. As they searched for a solution, they spotted a large cave. Its entrance was marked by the fabled face of Esquier carved into the stone above. Inside, they found the caverns illuminated in a bright purple and blue hue by the glowing mushrooms that grew everywhere. They planted an Expedition 66 flag near the entrance and began to make their way up the ramp, hoping to find Esquier himself and seek his help in replenishing their food stores. The path led them through dozens of hanging lights and through a narrow cave entrance, eventually opening into a large area where stone stairs rose towards a giant hot spring. There, a massive marshmallow figure lounged in the water. Marcel, recognizing him as Esquier, and with some relief, approached to ask for help. Esquier told them they could safely collect and eat the mushrooms, as he ate them all the time. Marcel asked if it was truly safe, and Esquier assured him that his best friend Berso ate them as well. Reluctant, but left with few options, Marcel agreed, and the expeditioners set out through the caves to gather mushrooms. They entered a cave to the right of Esquier, laying a few grapple points to make their way across, and planting another Expedition 66 flag. In a nearby alcove, they encountered a large rock turtle named Francois, who accosted them for trespassing, and likely told them to search for their mushrooms elsewhere. Not wanting to provoke him further, they left his cave and returned to the main area where they found the mushrooms Esquier had described. Eager to fill their bellies and replenish their supplies, they collected as many mushrooms as they could. The group made their way to the edge of the path they had crossed earlier, installed several handholds, and ascended to the top. Moving across another nearby walkway, they eventually found a small area to make camp for the day. They pitched makeshift tents and set up what little supplies remained. Marcel and the others, hungry and exhausted, eagerly began to eat handfuls of mushrooms. While they were eating, Esquier returned to check on them and see how they enjoyed the food. Suddenly, several expeditioners began to vomit violently, spewing bioluminescent bile as they collapsed and petrified on the spot. Marcel, alarmed, asked what was happening. Esquier replied that he didn't understand, but then let slip that his friend Verso was also immortal, perhaps explaining why he could eat the mushrooms safely. Now furious, Marcel quickly pulled out his journal and documented what he could with the time he had left as his fellow expeditioners perished around him.
Expedition 66, Marcel. Damn you, Esquier, and your stupid mushrooms. Your friend ate them with no problem, but it also seems your friend was immortal. That's the sort of extremely relevant detail that you should mention at the start. Oh, stop crying. You're not the one about to die. I can't believe this is the end of our expedition. We've learned nothing and achieved nothing, and we're not even leaving anything useful for future expeditions. Damn it all, I should never have trusted a giant talking marshmallow. Great, and now I'm losing consciousness.
With that, Marcel succumbed to the poison, dying like all the others, and leaving behind no lasting legacy for the members of Expedition 66. Though the precise mission of Expedition 65 is never stated, it is reasonable to assume they were either a trailblazing team or on a reconnaissance and fact-finding mission. Regardless, the Gamage came and went, and Expedition 65 set sail with several ships in their fleet, bolstered by an influx of volunteers that year. They departed from Lumiere's harbor and navigated through the land barrier cave. There's no evidence of their journey on the first major landmass where the Stone Wave Cliffs are located. Based on where they ultimately ended up, it is likely they sailed past the Stone Wave Cliffs and then along the eastern coast, passing the rock quarry. During their journey, they suffered some kind of accident, or perhaps worse, fell victim to an attack by the mighty Serpent Fair. Either way, they found themselves stranded in a cove on the east coast near Minoko Station. Whatever had damaged their ships caused one vessel to crash across the strait near the coastal cave area. The survivors regrouped as best they could, gathering both people and supplies. They began a trek across the land to the nearby coastal cave, eventually making their way inside. Following the stone tunnel, they were guided by white embedded seashells along the floor of the cave. Along the way, they planted an Expedition 65 flag and pressed forward until they reached an opening suffused with a strange orange hue. Inside, they were mesmerized by the surreal sight of floating anchors and the neon ethereal image of Serpent Fair in the distance. Two strange white figures appeared, and as the expeditioners drew close, they realized these were white Nevrons working a forge. The Nevrons invited them to look at what they had created, offering the expeditioners tools and weapons for purchase. Though hesitant at first, the team accepted, buying what they needed to survive. The Nevrons thanked them for their patronage, and after thanking the Nevrons for their help, the group returned outside to survey the situation and plan for survival while trapped in the region. They looked south and noticed the coastline wrapped around, and speculated they might be able to travel and meet up with the other ships, assuming those crews had survived. They made their way toward the dilapidated remains of an old building, attempting every possible route to climb the massive cliffs and mountains. Without any surviving equipment, they found themselves unable to scale the obstacles, leaving them stranded. Resigned to their fate, the survivors returned to their ship, pitching tents and using whatever tools they had left to weather their situation for as long as possible. Looking across the strait, they could just make out the wrecks of their comrades' ships on the opposite shoreline, never knowing if those crews had survived. Ultimately, they faded away in the next Kamaj, leaving behind no further evidence of their journey or their end. Across the strait, the rest of Expedition 65 recovered from their own wreck and likely decided to head inland, away from the coast. Tired and exhausted, needing to regroup, Commander Aurelian ordered that they make camp for the evening. The others agreed, setting up tents and getting some rest while they considered their next steps without their ships. The next morning, they resolved that the best course of action would be to continue on foot toward the monolith, hoping to find answers at the train station in the snowy mountain path known as Minoko Station. They journeyed across the shifting landscape, the temperatures dropping steadily into freezing cold, but they persevered and pressed forward. As they neared the entrance to Minoko Station, They saw the derailed and wondrous trains they hadn't seen since the fracture and headed inside. Moving through the hazy, snow-filled environment, Aurelian instructed them to plant an Expedition 65 flag near the station entrance. Pressing on, they were shocked to come across many large, hairy stone-like creatures, the grandest of legend. Their bodies were laid out before them, dead, as though they had recently been attacked. The team paused to study the scene, but only briefly before pushing onward. They saw a vast, icy tunnel ahead and braced themselves for whatever unknowns might await on the other side. Upon exiting the tunnel, they were greeted by the living Grandis, who welcomed them with open arms. Guided through the station, they saw more dead Grandis, and as they surveyed the carnage, realized Nevrons had been among the attackers as well. Eventually, they made their way to the heart of the Grandis tribe that lived at the station and planted another Expedition 65 flag. While there is no concrete evidence of what happened next, it is reasonable to speculate that the expeditioners spoke with the Grandis, explaining their goal to reach the monolith and the Patris. They likely told the Grandis they were pressed for time, with the Gomage drawing near, and sought their help. The Grandis, in turn, probably explained that without their ships, there was no practical way for the humans to reach the Patris, and that the Grandis themselves were entirely unaffected by the Gomage. Though disappointed to learn about the vast sea separating them from their ultimate goal, Aurelian and the others eventually resigned themselves to stay with the Grandis until the Gomage arrived. The commander documented everything in one final journal entry.
Expedition 65, Aurelian. The Grandis have embraced us with such warmth and hope. What a balm for the soul to know that other beings survived, that we in Lumiere are not alone. It truly is a miracle. The Grandis retreated to higher ground after Nevrons overran their lands. It is bittersweet, but at least the most important parts of their civilization will survive. Their children. Fortunately for them, they do not appear affected by the Gomage the way we are. It is painful knowing our expedition has failed, but at least we can enjoy our final days among friends.
The expeditioners continued to live out their remaining days among the Grandis. While Aurelian and a few others eventually fell to an inevitable Nevron attack, there is no further trace of the rest of Expedition 65. This leads me to believe that they perished at the year's end, lost to the arrival of the Gomage. Expedition 64 was another logistical mission, but with one major difference. They were tasked with establishing radio communication lines from Lumiere across the entire continent, so that future expeditions would be able to report back as they traveled. The expedition was divided into 3 teams, each with its own commander. Gamma was led by Marceau, Beta by Colleen, and Epsilon by Ben, whose second in command was Jean. They set out from Lumiere, carrying several antennae, wire, and other electronic devices meant to help them build their communications network. The teams reached the land barrier cave entrance and made their way inside, venturing out into the unknown. After surviving the falls, they did not make it very far. The main force landed on the eastern shores, directly across from the coast of the Spring Meadows. Beta and Colleen continued further east to land on the far shoreline, while Gamma and Epsilon made landfall and began to set up camp. The teams pitched tents and pulled out their radio equipment, setting up an antenna at the camp center. Gamma was sent ahead to see if they could establish a line further inland, while Beta tried to set up on the eastern shore, but was never heard from again. Unbeknownst to them, someone was using Beta's lines to eavesdrop on Gamma and Epsilon's communications. Though it isn't directly stated, it can be easily inferred that Painted Grimoire and Painted Verso had discovered the expeditioners' plans. Painted Grimoire, recognizing the danger that establishing communication lines with Lumiere could pose to Eileen, the paintress, no doubt warned his son, and together they plotted to put a stop to it. They wiped out all of Beta's team and destroyed their ship. Meanwhile, Ben decided to record the recent incidents affecting his and Marceau's teams.
Ben, 64, Epsilon. We radioed our first report to Gamma. The line is good. Alpha will be out of radio range for a few days as they investigate down coast. They spotted an interesting island which could make a good relay point for the southern half of the continent. But Gamma hasn't heard from Beta in 2 weeks. Marceau should reach her in another day. I hope Colleen is okay. But it seems someone is using our radios against us. How do they even know our codes? Nobody's used them since the fracture. Sean fears we've been betrayed, but I refuse to believe that.
Later that evening, when Marceau and his team returned to camp, Painted Verso and his father attacked, killing all members of both teams to release their chroma back to the Paintress. Only 3 managed to escape. Those survivors salvaged what they could from the attack, but were inevitably hunted down by wandering Nevrons, who petrified them as they fell from their injuries. The ambitions and importance of Expedition 64 were cut short, and all that remains are the ruins of their camps. Expedition 63 was assembled not to lay a trail, but to carve a direct path through the landscape with speed. They took several ships and loaded actual cars onto them, intending to drive quickly across the terrain to the monolith. Gerald had outfitted the vehicles with reinforced plating, allowing them to traverse all manner of land and pushing through the continent without fear. The expedition's commander, Damien, and his driver, Hector, boarded the ship with the rest of the teams as they set out from Lumiere toward the land barrier. Unlike previous expeditions, Expedition 63 left little in the way of evidence behind. After likely landing on the shores near the spring meadows, they dropped the cargo hold, loaded up the vehicles, and began their journey across the continent. Their exact route is difficult to trace, but they eventually arrived near the entrance to the ancient sanctuary and decided to drive their vehicles through it, blazing a trail as they went. Entering the sanctuary's vast expanse of red grass and trees, they planted an Expedition 63 flag before slowly maneuvering their cars to a tight mountain cliffside, taking in the distant view of a massive wooden statue. They made camp for the night, installing a few handholds along a cliff edge to keep out of sight of any threats that might roam the area. After recovering, they packed up their vehicles and resumed their journey. Traveling down the narrow path, they likely encountered the faceless boy, who offered answers to questions they could not fully grasp. Continuing through a slender stone passage, they eventually reached a large open clearing and were stunned by the sight before them. The ground was littered with body parts of the fabled Gestrels they had heard so much about. They drove forward slowly, absorbing the carnage, and near the beginning of a new pathway, planted another Expedition 63 flag to mark their progress. As they navigated the branching paths, they encountered large wooden mechanical structures roaming the area, which soon began to attack. Damien ordered the team to push through, and Hector hit the gas, the other vehicles following close behind. Damien warned Hector to slow down, but it was already too late. A massive wooden mechanical beast stepped out into their path. Hector tried to brake, but he was unable to stop in time. The vehicle crashed, and the other 4 vehicles collided with the walls as they attempted to evade the wreck. The team emerged from the wreckage, trying to recover, as they watched several small wooden creatures crawl out from the contraption they had just struck and scurry away. Damien checked on the safety of his team, and then recorded the incident in his journal.
63rd, Damien. Damn it! I can't believe we crashed into this. Whatever this massive thing is. So much for Gerald's vaunted reinforced front plates. I can't believe we have to abandon the cars already. We're nowhere close to the Paintress. I'll definitely have a concussion. I could have sworn I saw some Gestrels running out of that thing. I'm definitely hallucinating. Damn it, Hector. I told you to slow down!
Damien then ordered the group to set up a base camp, unloading every bit of supplies they had and establishing a perimeter. The sense of futility in continuing their journey was likely palpable, especially when Nevrons eventually wandered into the sanctuary and attacked. Damien and Hector were killed in the assault, and as they fell and bled out, their bodies petrified where they lay. The remaining members of the expedition were forced to flee, seeking out various alcoves in which to hide. Carrying whatever supplies they could manage, some were chased down and trapped by Nevrons, petrifying where they fell. Eventually, the survivors regrouped and found a narrow pathway, venturing inside with all who remained. Inside, they surveyed the high, sheltered rock walls and the ornamentation of red trees and plants, envisioning the possibility of carving out a new life in the sanctuary before the next Kamaj. With their engineering expertise, most likely with Gerald among the survivors, they began to build a future for themselves. They gathered wood, fashioned it into lumber, and constructed a makeshift shelter to live in. All their supplies, notes, and journals were packed inside. Salvaged tin buckets were repurposed for drinking and bathing, and books provided entertainment and tools for environmental study. Evidence of their interaction with local Gestrels is seen in the furniture inscribed with trademark Gestrel writing, suggesting trade and possible collaboration in improving the designs of future Gestrel Sacapatats. Life's necessities endured, and they even constructed a wooden outhouse, further proof that they were determined to make the sanctuary their home for as long as possible. Their greatest achievement was the construction of a windmill, built from the salvaged remains of their vehicles and other abandoned metals found nearby. This mechanical turbine was likely designed to harness the powerful drafts that swept through the stone valleys and dense red forested canopies of the sanctuary. It likely served two primary purposes. The mechanical rotation powered a makeshift pump, drawing clean groundwater from beneath the sanctuary's root network to sustain the camp. Or, it provided rotational energy to grind down raw materials and minerals from the caves into tactical supplies or basic survival components. Ultimately, this windmill stood as a kinetic, purely mechanical solution to a desperate tactical problem, using only local physics and scavenged steel to keep an endangered crew functional on the edge of unknown territory. I have found no further evidence of petrified remains directly linked to the expedition, so it is reasonable to believe that they lived out their days in the ancient sanctuary until the next Gamage, fading into red petals, or that they met their end elsewhere, never to be seen again. Either way, their ingenuity and survivor skills paid off, as the traces of Expedition 63 remain for future expeditions to marvel at. The Gamage came and went, and Expedition 62 was next up to face the challenge. Their specific mission set was never stated, but it's fair to assume that, like many before them, their original intent was either fact-finding or laying the path for future expeditions. A small contingent set out from the harbor that day, beginning their journey toward the land barrier. After passing the falls, they headed for the first major landmass, but no evidence exists to clarify exactly where they landed. They left very little behind, but as with most other expeditions, once we see where they ended up, we can reasonably speculate the route they took. At some point, they suffered heavy losses in the interior near the spring meadows. They recovered what they could and made camp, contemplating their next steps. With the vast landscape ahead and so few remaining, the team lost faith in the original mission. Instead, they decided to turn their focus to hunting Nevrons, transforming their survival into a game. Each kept track of their kills, competing for the top spot among them. They moved across the land, resting as needed, and relentlessly cutting down every Nevron they encountered. Many more were lost along the way, but the survivors kept their spirits high, determined to be the expeditioner with the most kills. Their path took them near Yellow Harvest and the hidden Gestural Arena, where they faced more Nevrons, whittling their numbers down to just a handful. They made camp nearby, intending to return and rest before continuing. Eventually, they pressed on until they reached the coast. With no ship to cross the sea before them, they decided to make camp and constructed a giant wooden board to track their kill counts, planning to spend the remainder of their days doing what they had grown to love. Only 6 remained, and one member, Vigil, took it upon himself to record their standings in a journal.
Vigil, Expedition 62. Eugène beat the rest of us to 100 kills, but I'm still 3 shy. I might need to do some solo hunting if I'm going to even up the score. Oh, I can hear a big Nev coming. They count for double. If I kill it quick, I can boost my score.
Their respite was short-lived. They were approached by a massive Nevron wielding a large anchor. The creature decimated all 6, leaving none alive to tell their tale. All that remained were their scoreboard and their petrified bodies. No lasting legacy, except that Expedition 62's journey ended with them doing what they loved most. Their final remnants now lie as stone on the coast, forever in the shadow of the monolith. Expedition 61 was next to set out, tasked with a combination of reconnaissance and trailblazing, placing handholds and grapple points to lay the foundation for future missions. Much like Expedition 70 and the others before them, their purpose was to make the journey easier for those who come after. The expedition left the docks of Lumiere with high hopes, sailing for the cave entrance that marked the beginning of so many journeys. Once they emerged on the far side, their true expedition began. As with many of the previous expeditions, there is little in the way of flags or journals from the early stages of their journey. However, it appears they had their sights set on a place they believed had not yet been explored, the Reacher. Given that it was where they ultimately ended up, it is reasonable to trace their route as follows. Sailing east around the Stonewave Cliffs, avoiding Serpent Fair, then heading west along the coastline near the rock quarry. Eventually, they found themselves within the sight of a massive creature on stilts, an axon, and the towering wooden structure that stretched ever skyward. As they drew closer, awe and a sense of daunting challenge likely filled the group, confronted by the sheer scale of what lay before them. They disembarked and climbed to the large dock of the strange structure. Proceeding down the path of wooden planks beneath their feet, they stepped out into the open air. Here, the expedition's commander, Margot, instructed them to plant an Expedition 61 flag, marking the official start of their journey in this place. With ropes in hand, they prepared to cross the first chasm, intending to set a grapple point on the far side. Once across, they realized they still had to reach a distant structure, but the vast distance required careful planning. As they strategized, 2 scouts ascended to the level above, using a chroma rope, only to be ambushed by 2 large Nevrons wielding tools. Trapped with no escape, one lost an arm, the other was struck over the head, and both bled out, petrified soon after. The team pressed on, discovering a path populated by giant Nevrons with hammers and saws, working together to build the structure. Sometimes, these Nevrons would even harm each other, throwing one another over the edge. Margot led her team around them, doing her best to avoid confrontation. With caution, they finally crossed the vast chasm, laying more grapple points, and eventually reached the other side, one step closer to uncovering the secrets of the Reacher. After crossing the chasm, the team spotted a large hot air balloon nearby. A small group broke away to assess whether the adjacent area could benefit from additional grapples or handholds. Upon reaching their destination, they determined that there was no practical advantage to placing any. However, dread quickly filled their eyes as they found themselves surrounded by 3 large Nevrons. There was nothing they could do. They fought back with all their strength, but the large creatures wielding their massive tools, bludgeoning the expeditioners to death. The group died in pools of their own blood and ink, eventually turning to stone. The Nevrons then turned their attention to Margot and the remaining members, who quickly made their way to the hot air balloon. Guided by Margot's leadership, they ascended high above, moving to the next part of the structure. Despite their losses, they adhered to the expeditioner's motto, "When one falls, we continue." Pressing on, they planted another Expedition 61 flag and faced a challenge similar to the one they encountered earlier, a vast chasm to cross. They plotted and planned, eventually laying enough grapples to reach the far side. Continuing forward, the main group advanced and attempted to ascend higher into the area. Meanwhile, 2 of Margot's scouts scaled a cliff by laying handholds, creating an alternate path for future explorers. The scouts traversed large, abandoned wooden platforms, laying more grapples for easy passage. Reaching the other side, they were met by a dead end. As they attempted to return to the group, they were ambushed by a new breed of strange Nevrons. The creatures attacked with ferocity, inflicting severe injuries, limbs lost, blood spilled. The scouts eventually petrified, frozen forever in agony, their fate unknown to the others. The rest of the expedition made it to the top of the hill and discovered another hot air balloon. They gathered their supplies and used it to ascend to the next level of the Reacher. There, they found themselves at the entrance to a massive labyrinth of wooden platforms. As they began to navigate the area, Margot planted another Expedition 61 flag, and the team split into 2 groups, one ascending to the lower levels, the rest to the upper ones. 4 members of the team headed down to the lower level, descending the nearby wooden ramp when something unusual caught their attention. They discovered a large marble arch structure, and as they rounded the corner, they saw a massive door. The expeditioners tried to open it, but their efforts were in vain. The door would not budge. While they were distracted, a group of large tool-wielding Nevrons closed in around them. Vastly outnumbered, the expeditioners ran, but soon found themselves completely surrounded with nowhere left to go. Bracing for the inevitable, they faced their end as the Nevrons raised their tools and beat them to death, leaving the 4 to solidify, forever memorialized by the brutality of their demise. Meanwhile, Margot and the remaining expeditioners made their way to the upper levels, eventually reaching a room where a strange creature sat at a table building. This Nevron resembled the others, but was smaller and wore a suit. It was constantly tinkering and building, with a small-scale model of the structure behind it, suggesting it was either the foreman or the lead architect. The creature paid little attention to the humans as they passed by and continued onward, eventually coming to another hot air balloon. As they began loading up to travel to the next level, one of the large Nevrons dropped down from above and immediately attacked. It fired several nails, pinning an expeditioner against a rope, then swung its massive tool and struck another in the head, killing him instantly as he collapsed over a nearby crate. Margot and the others managed to fight the Nevron off, and at last, they boarded the balloon and ascended skyward, moving on to the next level of the Reacher. They reached the next area and disembarked, but this place was unlike any they had seen before. The entire region was blanketed in dense fog from the clouds, for they were now at a much higher altitude. Progress was slow and cautious as the expeditioners moved forward, everything seeming to go well, until Nevron suddenly charged through the fog and attacked. One expeditioner was pinned to the ground by a large nail driven through his chest. Another Nevron bailed in, wielding a massive frying pan, and struck an expeditioner over the head, sending him tumbling into a hay structure. Yet another was hit so hard, his skull was crushed, giving him a quick and painless death. Margot sounded the retreat, and the survivors scattered through the area, struggling to navigate in the dense mist. The group split up, with one team heading west, while Margot and the others went east. The westbound team was chased by multiple Nevrons, laying chroma ropes in a desperate attempt to find safety. Eventually, each was cornered throughout the area, and one by one, they met tragic ends, never to be seen again. Margot and her remaining companions reached a cave in a small alcove at the mountain's edge, near a waiting hot air balloon. They decided to make camp and pitch tents for the night, hoping to rest and continue their mission the next day. In the morning, they took the balloon to the top of the structure. They managed to install several more grapple points, and upon reaching the summit, they planted one last Expedition 61 flag. At the edge of the cliff, they encountered a strange girl with white hair and skin, wearing a porcelain mask and painting quietly. They approached, likely asking many questions, but she responded only with gestures and grunts, barely acknowledging them as the giant Axon patrolled nearby. Descending back to their camp, they lost more members along the way, leaving only Margot and one other. They tried to recover and rest for the evening, and Margot closed the day with a final journal entry.
Expedition 61. Margot. See, but I disagree. I don't think she's lonely. She's alone, but she's not lonely. They clearly have some sort of society here, and she's the odd one out. Well, except for her co-conspirator in the workshop. I've never seen creatures fighting amongst themselves before. I admit I'm impressed by her creativity and drive. I feel almost like a traitor for saying it. But there's something about her. You can't help but want her to reach the sky.
Not long after, a large tool-wielding Nevron wandered into the camp and attacked. Margot managed to deliver a final blow, felling the Nevron, but it was too late. Both had suffered critical injuries, eventually collapsing and dying, their bodies petrified where they fell. The legacy of Expedition 61 may have ended in tragedy, but their courage opened a new frontier in an unexplored region of their shattered world, leaving a path for those who would come after. The Gamage came and went, and Monolith Year 60 began. During the time of Expedition 61's journey, the members of Expedition 60 had been training relentlessly to reach the absolute peak of human potential. They built so much muscle mass that they were nearly impervious, able to crush any enemy they encountered on the nearby islands with ease. The citizens of Lumiere laughed at the notion that muscle and raw strength alone would defeat the Paintress, but the members of Expedition 60 did not care. They were single-minded, reaching heights of conditioning and power never seen before. Their plan was simple: to swim and run across the continent, relying on their sheer strength and physical size to move faster than any ship or land vehicle could. Realizing that clothing would only weigh them down and slow them, they left Lumiere wearing nothing but their birthday suits. They sprinted across the main stone walkway of the harbor, leapt into the water with grace, and began to swim, leaving a large wake in their trail. Their route took them toward the land barrier, deliberately skipping the cave, and opting for the most direct route possible over both land and sea. Expedition 60 only left 2 flags behind for us to trace their journey, but given their destination, journal entries, and in-game dialogue, we can reasonably reconstruct the path they took. After crossing the land barrier, they dove back into the ocean, passing through the coastal regions of the Stone Wave Cliffs and out into the Great Sea, proceeding at a blinding pace. There is no record of it, but somehow, as they neared the strait between the rock quarry and the white sands, they did not encounter or draw the attention of Serpent Fair. Personally, I like to imagine that their sheer aura, chroma, and confidence sent such a signal that even the terror of the skies and seas took one look and said, "Nope." Though I admit, that's just a humorous headcanon from me. Likely seeking to rest their arms, they altered their route northeast, sprinting past the coastal cave area and scaling the rocky mountain nearby. They reached the summit and made camp for the night, surrounded by seaweed, with what supplies they had managed to carry. During their rest, a scout spotted a small island nearby, marked by a large wooden structure and strange lights. The group decided to take a brief detour and investigate. Upon arrival, they discovered a gestural beach, established as a challenge for any who wished to attempt it. At its center stood a tall tower raining down blue fireballs, fitted with handholds for climbing. One expeditioner volunteered for the challenge, and with the commander's permission, he quickly scaled the tower, dodging the fireballs with ease. At the top, he was greeted by a Grandis, who offered him a bathing suit as a prize. The expeditioner declined, stating he had no need for clothing, and left down from the tower, rejoining his comrades, who no doubt celebrated his triumph. Having conquered the gestural beach, the group headed northwest, resuming their straight path toward the Paintress. The expeditioners pressed on, passing the wreckage of Expedition 78's airships and cutting straight between both Visage and Surrend Island. As they drew closer to their goal, they noticed a strange sheen on the horizon, a barrier surrounding the monolith. The Chroma barrier, once destroyed by Simon 40 years prior, had now regenerated. Undeterred, Expedition 60's commander rallied his men, calling for a full charge at the barrier. With unwavering resolve, they accelerated, striking the Chroma wall with the force of a tsunami. Though they did not shatter it, their momentum was enough to break through the other side, emerging unscathed and unfazed. They reached the shore at the base of the monolith and entered the area. The naked men paused to catch their breath, gazing in awe and confidence at the towering structure before them, convinced more than ever that they would be the first to complete their mission and finally destroy the Paintress. Following the winding path, they reached the base of the monolith. Sensing their combined strength, perhaps reminded of Simon, who she had encountered decades earlier, Eileen likely opened a portal for them, allowing entry into the heart of the monolith. Inside, the men began their sprint to the top. The first area they encountered was a distorted version of the ancient sanctuary. Though they had never visited this place on the continent, they were struck by the overwhelming tones of red. They planted one Expedition 60 flag and pressed onward. Next, they traversed a distorted version of the Stone Wave Cliffs, another area they had only glimpsed from the coast during their swim. They made their way through the rocky terrain until they found a set of stairs leading upward. As they began to charge toward the level reached by Expedition 70, they were confronted by Eileen, the Paintress herself. Much as she had with Simon, Eileen warned them that they were making a grave mistake. She pleaded that she was trying to save them, and revealed the true architect of the Gamage was Renoir, who resided below the monolith. She urged them to seek him out, and defeat him to free themselves from Lumiere's yearly curse. Convinced by her words, the men agreed to take care of Renoir. Before descending below the monolith, the commander entrusted William with a message to deliver to Lumiere, to warn them to stop attacking the Paintress and target Renoir instead. William, though hesitant, began his long journey back to Lumiere, determined to carry out his commander's orders. The game never reveals what became of those who went below the monolith, but knowing what exists in Renoir's drafts, we can reasonably speculate about the fate that awaited them. Expedition 60 reached the depths beneath the monolith, taking in the vast expanse of chroma and creation. Their unmatched conditioning allowed them to carve through any adversary they encountered until they reached the lowest levels. There, they were confronted by a man with one arm and a massive sword, Simon. After 40 years of torture and manipulation, his mind had become a battleground. Simon raised his blade as the expeditioners braced themselves for the fight of their lives. They fought valiantly. Simon's pure chroma, gifted to him by Clair, proved to be too much. He cut them all down, leaving no trace of their chroma behind, and bringing an end to the valiant and truly unique journey of Expedition 60. Their story, however, was not yet finished. William, the messenger, used every ounce of strength he had left to swim back across the continent to Lumiere and deliver the truth. He likely chose the most direct route, cutting across snow-capped mountains, open plains, and the vast seas. Eventually, he reached the final landmass and the land barrier separating him from Lumiere. In the distance, he could see the city preparing for the festival of the Gamage. Exhausted, he paused just long enough to record his story in his journal, hoping that if he failed, someone might later find it and learn the truth.
William, Expedition 60. They mocked us when we said the human body is the strongest of them all. We trained relentlessly, and now our bodies have achieved the pinnacle of human performance, with which we are able to crush our enemies. We are so much more agile and aerodynamic without the heavy uniforms constraining our glorious muscles. With Leslie's unstoppable training regime, we are impervious. That's how we were able to charge through that ghostly Gamage barrier and reach the Paintress. But it seems we've been wrong about what she is. The Paintress is just as trapped as we. The real terror lies beneath the monolith. The rest of Expedition 60 marched on to confront him, while I was tasked to warn Lumiere. But it seems I might have run out of time. One last swim separates me from Lumiere, but even with my mighty muscles, I don't know if I can outswim the Gamage. So here I write my final message. Bare naked muscles will save the world. And don't waste time on the Paintress. Aim for the bottom of the monolith.
Carrying the journal, he dove back into the water and approached Lumiere from the west. He entered the city, swimming through its canals and channels, almost reaching the town itself. But as he reached the edge, the Paintress rose in the distance and changed the number from 60 to 59. In that instant, William was Gamaged, and his journal sank to the bottom of the bay, never to be found, never revealing the truth of what happened to Expedition 60 or who was truly behind the Gamage. Though their story had a touch of the extraordinary and the absurd, Expedition 60 was, without a question, the most badass group ever to leave the docks of Lumiere. Their mission may have ended in failure, but their legacy they left behind will never be forgotten. Expedition 59 embarked on their journey with a more traditional approach than the bold tactics of Expedition 60. They sailed toward the land barrier and entered the cave entrance. After overcoming the falls on the other side, they continued sailing northeast, likely landing on the coast near the spring meadows. Traveling inland, the expeditioners came upon a region covered in bright pink foliage, which caught the eye of Julian, the expedition's commander. Drawn by curiosity, they approached the area, likely encountering several Nevrons along the way, until they discovered a vast entrance leading to the Abast Caves. Inside, they followed a long, dark tunnel, drawn toward the faint light near an exit. Emerging from the tunnel, they planted an Expedition 59 flag and began exploring their surroundings. The area was surrounded by pink blades of grass and flowers, and as they walked, they observed sheep that appeared almost ethereal, glowing with the same shade of pink. They likely spent some time studying the unusual sheep and taking in the spectacular views, but when nothing else of note could be found, Julian ordered the team to pack up and move out. In the distance, they spotted a region teeming with ocean plant life, the area known as the Flying Waters, and set their course for its entrance. Upon entering, they passed the petrified remains of some members of Expedition 68 and continued their march, eventually running across their commander and likely finding the related journal. Along the way, they planted another Expedition 59 flag, continuing to make sense of the strange environment. Their path led them into a narrow cavern system. As they navigated its twists and turns, they likely lost some members, but still managed to plant another Expedition 59 flag as a waypoint. Exiting the labyrinth of rock walls, they emerged into a large open area filled with red flowers, all encircling a single bloom at its center. The group likely paused to observe and study the scene before deciding to press onward. Leaving the Flying Waters behind, they traveled northwest toward the ancient sanctuary and the hidden gestural arena. But as they moved through the region known as Yellow Harvest, they spotted the largest Nevron they had ever seen, towering above them at the top of the mountain. Their curiosity got the better of them, and Julian and the others made their way toward the bright yellow forest, determined to investigate what lay within. Once inside the area, they discovered an Expedition 68 flag and a trail of bodies leading deeper into the forest. Julian urged the group forward, though he likely began to doubt the wisdom of their decision to enter. Along the way, they found other flags left by Expedition 68 and additional remains. Something went wrong. Perhaps they failed to bring enough provisions, or they were attacked and lost their food. Either way, desperation soon set in. They reached the central pond surrounded by collapsed buildings and began laying grapple points, hoping to climb higher and reach the safety of a cave embedded in the cliffside. Deep within the cavern, they passed another Expedition 68 flag and decided to make camp, grateful for the relative safety it offered. With food in short supply, Lore took several others out to hunt. They managed to kill a Nevron, dragged it back to camp, and cooked it. However, eating the meat made everyone deathly ill. Seeking a cure, Julian decided to use nearby mushrooms to make a broth, convinced it would help. As some of them ate the broth, Julian took the time to record the incident in his journal.
Julian, 59er. Disgusting.
Laura's an idiot. I can't believe she convinced everyone to eat the Nevron. They've been puking for the past few hours. Great. Well, we can't move on with so many people sick. I told her it was a bad idea. Hopefully they'll feel better with some mushroom broth to settle their stomachs.
Tragically, out of the 8 who remained, 4 collapsed, poisoned by the commander's mushroom broth. The 4 survivors did not last much longer. A strange, red-orange viscous substance erupted through the cave, engulfing the last expeditioners and draining their life force, petrifying everything in a final goop of horror. Expedition 59 stands as a cautionary tale, a reminder that in times of desperation, even the most capable among us can make decisions that lead to ruin. Their journey ended, a stark lesson in the cost of underpreparedness and the thin line between hope and disaster. Another Gamage had come and gone, and Expedition 58 said farewell to their loved ones before setting out from the Lumerian docks through the morning fog toward the land barrier. While there is little evidence, few flags or journals, documenting their early part of their journey, we can, based on where they ultimately ended up, reasonably speculate about their path. It is likely they sailed east, navigating around the first massive landmass and passing the jagged edges of the stone-waved cliffs. At some point along the way, they encountered Painted Verso, who agreed to join them and help them in their mission to stop the Paintress. As they continued, they likely spotted a small island with a strange door at the end of the rocky path. Making landfall, they found themselves able to enter the manor. Inside, they met the curator, who in his own cryptic fashion offered to craft them a weapon capable of breaking the barrier if they could find him enough chroma to do so. After leaving the manor, the expedition could have either traveled west toward the Endless Tower or east past the White Sands. Regardless of the exact route, they eventually reached the northern shores near the esoteric ruins. Disembarking, they were greeted by the sight of a decimated city, surrounded by large glowing swords, dripping with chroma, and a giant woman impaled through the head with one of these swords. Painted Verso likely suggested they look for another way into the city, leading the group into the esoteric ruins under the command of Delphine. Gathering all the supplies they could, they ventured into the ruins, installing a grapple hook and crossing an open area near a broken building. Upon reaching the building, Delphine instructed the team to plant an Expedition 58 flag at its base before sending a group ahead to place handholds along the large cliff, creating a route around the city toward a mansion that Painted Verso had mentioned. They encountered a strange maze of buildings and a broken cliffside path leading down into the area. Upon reaching the bottom, the group needed a place to make camp, so they found a large nook in the cliff and installed several handholds to help them descend safely. They traveled to the back of the nook and made camp for the evening, giving Painted Verso and Delphine time to devise a way through the maze. By the next day, they had figured out the route and pressed on, only to encounter several collapsed buildings and a vast chasm they simply could not cross safely. Undeterred, Painted Verso likely told them of another way, so the team turned back, placing new grapple points to help future expeditions return to the cliffside path more easily. Exiting the esoteric ruins, Painted Verso led Expedition 58 into a city they had once thought lost, the remnants of Old Lumiere. Once inside, the expeditioners took in the sheer devastation of the place their people had once called home. They moved carefully toward the city center, slowly approaching the massive lifeless woman with a city on her back. As they drew nearer, Painted Verso explained the nature of the creature to Delphine, then told the group to remain where they were, likely explaining that he needed to scout ahead and check on something. Delphine used the opportunity to study the giant creature more closely, recording her observations and questions in her journal.
Expedition 58, Delphine. The behemoth is such a marvel. It has a small city on its back that I really want to explore, but the others think it's too risky, too easy to get caught by the Nevs around here. Verso called this thing an axon. Apparently they are incredibly powerful, with hearts of pure chroma, utterly unkillable. Except, clearly, something did. Verso and his father, Renoir, spent years trying to kill the axons, hoping to forge their hearts into a weapon to break the barrier. But no dice. I bet the curator would love to get his hands on one of those hearts. He could easily forge such a weapon.
Suddenly, an old man appeared, matching the description Painted Verso had given of his father. The expeditioners likely greeted him and began to ask questions, but Painted Renoir responded without a word. He lashed out mercilessly, cutting through the group and rendering their chroma, sending it back to the paintress. In less than a minute, Painted Renoir had completely erased the entire expedition. When Painted Verso returned, no doubt drawn by the echoing screams of his companions, he could do nothing but stare in anger and remorse, knowing that he had been powerless to save them or achieve his goals. Expedition 58's journey ended there, their legacy reduced to blood, ink, and a single journal left behind. That's where our journey through the Lost Expeditions ends for now. Every flag, shattered camp, and lost journal is a testament to the courage and the tragedy of those who came before Expedition 33. Their stories are not just history, they're the foundations on which the world of Clair Obscur is built. But we're not done yet. Part 2 of this investigation is still to come, where we'll uncover the rest of the expeditions and the secrets they left behind. And after that, we'll be charting new territory, diving into the dark, wild world of Evil West, and unraveling the lore of Final Fantasy XVI. If you enjoyed this deep dive, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. And don't forget to turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. These videos take a long time to make, and I love talking about lore with others. I want to hear your theories and discoveries, so leave a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. My name is Vigil, and this has been Video Game Lore, and I will see you all in Part 2.